The sun sets behind the jagged peaks of the Rocky Mountains, casting long shadows over the arid, unforgiving landscape. In the Wild West, where lawlessness ruled and every corner hid a secret, strange and unexplainable events still echo through time. Ghostly figures in forgotten towns, unsolved disappearances, and eerie sightings, stories that defy logic and chill the bones. Was it the ruthless frontier spirit or something far darker at play? As we step into the shadows of history, one question remains. What truth lies hidden beneath the myths? So sit back, relax, and let's uncover the terrifying mysteries of the Wild West. The year was 1600, and the fog hung heavy over the bleak landscape of Scotland. The cold, damp earth seemed to absorb the whispers of the past, and the walls of Gowrie House, tucked away in the quiet town of Perth, stood silent, bearing witness to one of the most perplexing and chilling events in British history, the Gowrie Conspiracy. In August of that year, the estate became the site of a tragedy that still eludes full understanding. The story is simple enough on the surface, a failed assassination attempt against King James VI of Scotland. But as the years have passed, questions have only multiplied, and what seemed like a straightforward case of treason now feels like a tangled web of power, politics, and perhaps something darker. The official account tells us that the Earl of Gowrie, John Ruthven, and his brother Alexander plotted to kill the king and seize control of Scotland. It was said to be a cold and calculated act of betrayal. The king, having arrived at Gowrie House for a private meeting with the Ruthvens, was allegedly ambushed by the brothers. The story goes that James managed to escape the trap, and in the chaos that followed, both Gowrie brothers were killed. To the public, it appeared as if the conspiracy had been thwarted before it could take full shape. But the details of that day never fully add up. Why would a noble family, which had been granted power and favor by the king, risk everything in such a brazen plot? And why, after the deaths of the Ruthvens, did James return to the scene, apparently unscathed and calm, only to announce that he had narrowly avoided an assassination attempt? His version of events seemed oddly rehearsed, as if he were spinning a tale to protect someone, or something. For decades, historians have debated the true nature of the events. Was it really an assassination attempt, or was there something more sinister at play? Some suggest that James may have been involved in a darker, more personal dispute with the Ruthven family, leading to a botched assassination that was later covered up. Others speculate that the king's own advisors had orchestrated the plot, hoping to remove the Ruthvens from power and secure their own position in the court. However, one of the most enduring theories is that James was not the intended target at all. Could it be that the plot was not aimed at the king, but at someone else entirely? Some argue that Gowrie House had been the site of a secret meeting, a meeting with individuals whose names and purposes were carefully hidden from history. Could the Ruthvens have been involved in something far beyond royal politics? Perhaps something connected to the occult or secret societies, influences which were whispered about in the royal court but rarely spoken of openly? There is, of course, the more fantastical theory, one that has intrigued and confounded historians for centuries. According to some accounts, King James, in the midst of the chaotic events of that fateful day, stumbled upon a hidden chamber in Gowrie House. Inside, he supposedly discovered a hidden treasure, an artifact so valuable and powerful that it could change the course of history. The idea of hidden treasures is not new to royal conspiracies, but no one has ever been able to substantiate this claim. Another unsettling element of the story is the mysterious disappearance of the bodies of the Ruthvens. Their corpses were never properly examined, and their deaths were immediately ruled as self-defense by James's own men. In a time when the slightest injury could ignite a political scandal, the quick and unquestioned handling of the case seems suspicious. Could there have been an ulterior motive for eliminating the Ruthvens so swiftly? Were they merely pawns in a much larger game? Despite the centuries that have passed since that summer day in 1600, the questions remain unanswered. Did James truly escape an assassination attempt, or was he the architect of a much darker plot? Was the story we've been told, one of betrayal and treason, merely a cover for something more mysterious? The fog of history, like the one that shrouded the landscape of Perth that day, still clings tightly to the facts, leaving the truth hidden in shadows. The mystery of the Gowrie Conspiracy endures, and the true events of that day remain a haunting enigma. What happened inside those walls? What was James really hiding? And perhaps, most troubling of all, what secrets are still buried, waiting to be uncovered? As we move from the fog-enshrouded history of Scotland's Gowrie Conspiracy, we now turn to another enigma that continues to haunt the pages of American history: the mysterious disappearance of the Roanoke colony and the chilling accounts of survivor sightings that followed. The year was 1587, when English settlers, under the leadership of John White, established the colony of Roanoke on an island off the coast of what is now North Carolina. The settlement, meant to be a foothold in the New World, quickly fell into peril. White, unable to secure enough resources from England, was forced to return to Britain for supplies. When he finally returned to Roanoke 3 years later, he found the settlement completely abandoned, with no trace of the 117 men, women, and children who had once lived there. What became of the settlers of Roanoke has been one of history's most perplexing and unsettling questions. The word Croatoan was carved into a post, and Crow was etched on a nearby tree, leaving behind only cryptic clues and the eerie impression of a sudden disappearance. Were the settlers killed by Native American tribes, or had they been forced to flee in the face of a great threat? Could they have assimilated into nearby indigenous communities, or was there something darker at work? These questions have been raised time and again by historians, archaeologists, and curious minds alike. But as if the mystery of Roanoke wasn't unsettling enough, whispers of strange sightings, some of them far beyond the realm of reason, have persisted for centuries. Could it be that survivors of the lost colony lived on, hidden in the shadows of the wilderness, their presence only revealed through eerie and unexplainable events? One of the first recorded reports that stirs the imagination dates back to the late 1600s, when a group of colonists from Virginia encountered a group of Native Americans who, they claimed, looked strikingly similar to the vanished Roanoke settlers. These individuals, described as having European features, pale skin, light eyes, and even distinctive clothing, spoke an unfamiliar language but displayed signs of having some connection to the lost colony. They were seen near the area of present-day North Carolina, where Roanoke had once flourished. In the centuries since, stories of similar sightings have been passed down, tales of strange individuals, far removed from their indigenous surroundings, seen wandering the forests of the Carolinas and beyond. There are accounts of early American pioneers who encountered people with the same features, blonde hair, blue eyes, who were said to belong to a group of people who had somehow survived the disastrous events of Roanoke and managed to live in isolation. They were known to interact with local tribes but always seemed slightly out of place, as though they had lived apart from the rest of humanity for far too long. But the most compelling, and perhaps most disturbing accounts come from the 18th and 19th centuries. Pioneers and settlers along the eastern coast of the United States began reporting encounters with individuals who, like those from earlier accounts, appeared to have European ancestry but lived among indigenous groups. These strange people, as they were often described, lived on the fringes of society, sometimes even forming small, isolated communities. They were spoken of with a sense of unease, as though they were not entirely human, as if their existence was a reflection of a world lost to time. One particularly eerie account comes from the mid-1800s, when a group of settlers in North Carolina encountered a tribe whose members were allegedly descendants of the Roanoke survivors. According to the settlers, these people spoke in a language that sounded strange and foreign, yet had an unmistakable European lilt. They wore clothes unlike those of other native tribes, garments that appeared to be made from European materials. The settlers were told that these mysterious individuals had once been part of a group that had been lost, and now they seemed to exist on the fringes of both native and settler society, caught between two worlds. In these reports, there is a thread that runs through each one, a sense that the Roanoke settlers didn't just vanish into history. They may have adapted, survived, and lived among the very people whose lands they had once sought to settle. But if they survived, what happened to their descendants? Did they remain hidden in plain sight, scattered and forgotten, their lives relegated to the fringes of American history? Of course, many historians dismiss these accounts as mere folklore, tales passed down through generations, perhaps exaggerated for dramatic effect. Skeptics argue that the Roanoke settlers, if they did survive, would have been absorbed into local tribes or eventually lost to history without leaving any definitive evidence behind. The stories, they say, are more the product of imagination and myth than historical reality. Yet, there is something undeniably unsettling about the consistency of these sightings across centuries. Could it be that the survivors of Roanoke were never truly lost, but simply existed out of sight, blending into the land and the people around them? Were they too frightened to reveal themselves to the wider world, choosing instead to live as outcasts, shunning the civilizations that had once sought to colonize the land? The more one examines these accounts, the more unsettling they become. The idea that a group of people could survive in isolation for so long, hidden, almost forgotten by the world, challenges our understanding of history itself. What if the story of Roanoke was never truly an end, but rather the beginning of a far stranger tale? What if the survivors of that ill-fated colony left behind more than just cryptic messages in the trees? They left behind a legacy, a thread that runs through the history of this land, quietly and mysteriously woven into the fabric of America's past. Perhaps, like the haunting whispers that still echo through the old walls of Roanoke, the mystery is far from over. What if there are still answers waiting to be uncovered, still pieces of the puzzle buried beneath centuries of silence? The history of Roanoke, it seems, is not a story easily put to rest, and the possibility of survivors, hidden somewhere in the vast wilderness, still stirs the imagination. Could the lost colony of Roanoke still be out there, waiting to be found? Or is it simply another ghost story, forever lost to the mists of time? As we leave the haunting traces of Jamestown's starving time behind, we now venture into a land not unlike it. One where survival itself became an unthinkable struggle, a place marked by brutal hardship and tragedy, where the very foundation of the American colonies was tested under the weight of human frailty. The year is 1607, and the winds along the James River are bitter and unyielding. The settlers of Jamestown, the first permanent English colony in North America, have just begun their desperate attempts to build a new life. In the beginning, the colony was filled with hope and grand aspirations. The Virginia Company promised gold, riches, and a new world of prosperity. But what they did not foresee was the harsh reality of the new world. The land, though seemingly fertile, was not forgiving. The settlers, many of whom were gentlemen unused to manual labor, were ill-prepared for the challenges that lay ahead. And yet, it was not until the winter of 1609 to 1610, a period now known as the Starving Time, that the colony's survival would hang in the balance. Jamestown, once brimming with life, quickly became a place of death. Starvation set in quickly as supplies from England failed to arrive, and the settlers were left to survive on what little they could hunt, forage, or steal. The colony's relationships with the local Powhatan Confederacy were deteriorating rapidly, with food and supplies becoming increasingly difficult to secure. In that winter, the settlers' worst fears were realized. Hunger overtook the colony, and with it came death, disease, and madness. By the time the spring thaw arrived in 1610, only 60 of the 500 original settlers remained. What happened during those months of desperate starvation? The answers are as grisly as they are uncertain. Contemporary accounts tell us of dire conditions, of colonists resorting to any means necessary to stay alive. But one story, more than any other, would echo through history, casting a shadow over Jamestown that has never truly lifted: the possibility that some of the settlers turned to cannibalism. The suggestion that the settlers of Jamestown resorted to cannibalism, a claim often dismissed as mere rumor, has nonetheless been hauntingly persistent. The idea is almost too horrific to fathom: men and women, starving and desperate, driven to the ultimate act of survival. But was this truly the case? Could such a deeply disturbing act have taken place? Or have the whispers of cannibalism been exaggerated, born out of the fevered imaginations of those who survived? In 2013, archaeologists made a chilling discovery that seemed to lend some credence to these long-held suspicions. During an excavation of the site, the remains of a young girl, approximately 14 years old, were uncovered. What made this discovery so unsettling were the distinctive cut marks on her bones, marks that suggested her body had been butchered, likely for food. It was an unnerving find, and the implications were clear. Here was evidence that at least one individual had been treated not as a person, but as a resource. However, while the evidence from the 2013 dig seems to suggest cannibalism may have occurred, it is far from conclusive. Some scholars argue that the cut marks could have been related to the preparation of animal remains rather than human flesh. Could the body have been scavenged for more mundane reasons? Or was this truly the desperate act of settlers pushed to the brink of starvation? The truth, as with so many aspects of the starving time, remains elusive. The accounts of those who lived through it are fragmented and often contradictory. While some survivors speak of cannibalism, others deny it altogether. It's a murky historical fog, one that blends the limits of human endurance with the vast unknowns of survival. What we know for sure is that death was omnipresent, and that it came in many forms: sickness, hunger, and perhaps something darker still. Beyond the physical hardship, the starving time also revealed the brutal and fragile nature of early colonial society. Jamestown was not just a settlement in peril, it was a microcosm of the broader struggle that would define the early history of America. The survival of the colony was not only a battle against nature, but a battle against the very foundations of what would become the American frontier. What began as a dream of riches and glory quickly descended into a nightmare of violence, deprivation, and collapse. One question that still lingers, unanswered and unresolved, is why the settlers were so unprepared for what they faced. What drove the Virginia Company to send such unqualified people to the New World? Was it sheer incompetence or a deliberate underestimation of the challenges ahead? And what of the relationship between the settlers and the Powhatan Confederacy? Could there have been opportunities for cooperation that were squandered, turning the indigenous people, who could have been allies, into enemies? Some historians argue that the problems at Jamestown were inevitable, given the poor planning and the arrogance of the settlers, who thought they could conquer nature without understanding it. Others suggest that the colony's leadership, under figures like Captain John Smith, was at fault for failing to establish lasting relationships with the Powhatan tribes, who controlled the vital resources that the settlers desperately needed. Despite the mysteries that swirl around the starving time, the colony of Jamestown did survive. By the spring of 1610, when a relief ship arrived with fresh supplies, the settlers were barely clinging to life, but they endured. They rebuilt, They adapted, and in time, the colony would flourish. Yet the events of those dark months in 1609 to 1610 left scars on the collective memory of America, a stark reminder of the fragility of life in the New World. What truly happened during the starving time? Were the settlers of Jamestown pushed to the brink of their humanity, resorting to unimaginable acts to survive? Was there more to their suffering than we will ever fully understand? The mystery of those months in 1609 to 1610 lingers, and like so many other historical tragedies, it raises unsettling questions about the limits of human survival. As we reflect on the fate of the settlers of Jamestown, one thing becomes clear. History is rarely as simple as we would like it to be. The truth is often buried in the unspoken, the unexplained, and the uncomfortable. And perhaps that is where the greatest mysteries lie, where the boundaries of survival blur with the shadows of the unknown. What might still be hidden beneath the soil of Jamestown? What secrets have yet to be uncovered from those dark, desperate days? Only time may reveal the answers. The sun hangs low over the rugged terrain of the American West, casting long shadows across the desolate hills and deep ravines. The wind stirs the dry earth, and the air, heavy with the scent of sagebrush, carries with it the quiet whispers of forgotten tales, stories that have faded into the cracks of history, their truths lost in time. Among these tales, there is one that still haunts the edges of legend: the mysterious disappearance of the Ettin twins. In the mid-1800s, the Ettin family was known to many in the small frontier town of Red Ridge, a sparse settlement carved into the wild landscape of what is now Wyoming. The twins, Jacob and Joshua, were the sons of a homesteading couple who had made their way west in search of a new life. The boys, described as strong and adventurous, were inseparable from childhood. As young men, they were known for their daring spirit, often seen riding across the plains or venturing into the mountains in search of treasure or unexplored territory. Their bond seemed unbreakable, until the fateful day they vanished without a trace. It was the summer of 1853 when the Ettin twins set off for what was to be a routine hunting trip, a journey that would take them into the foothills of the Wind River Range. The town had seen similar expeditions before, and nothing about the boys' departure seemed unusual. They had made provisions for a week's worth of supplies and were said to be confident, eager to explore an area that had recently been rumored to contain a hidden gold strike. But as days passed and the boys failed to return, an uneasy silence settled over Red Ridge. At first, the townspeople assumed that the twins had simply gotten lost or delayed, a common occurrence in the unforgiving landscape of the West. But as the days turned to weeks and no sign of the boys surfaced, the mood shifted from worry to something far darker: fear. The Ettin family, devastated by the uncertainty, organized a search party, calling upon the men of Red Ridge to venture into the mountains to find their sons. What the searchers found, or rather, what they did not find, only deepened the mystery. After scouring the area where the twins were last known to be, no signs of them were discovered. Their camp was found intact, but there was no trace of the boys themselves. No footprints, no belongings hastily abandoned, no clues, no signs of a struggle. The wilderness had swallowed them whole, and it was as if they had never existed at all. For months, rumors spread through the town like wildfire. Some claimed that the twins had encountered hostile Native American tribes and had been killed in a raid. Others whispered that they had stumbled upon an outlaw band, the notorious Red Hills Gang, who had murdered them to keep their treasure hunt a secret. But for all the theories, no evidence ever surfaced to support any of these explanations. It was as if the land itself had claimed the twins, leaving only emptiness in their wake. As the years went by, the disappearance of the Ettin twins became a ghost story, one told around campfires by those who had once known them. The wilderness, with its vast, uncharted expanses, seemed to hold secrets deeper than anyone could imagine. The lack of any physical evidence, the absence of a body, a weapon, or a trace of a struggle, left room for countless theories to take root. But in time, the case grew cold, and the mystery became one of those unsolved puzzles, a story whispered on the wind but never fully understood. However, in the late 1900s, the tale of the Ettin twins resurfaced with a chilling twist. A group of hikers, deep in the same part of the Wind River Range where the twins had disappeared more than a century earlier, discovered something unsettling: an old, rotting journal buried beneath the roots of an ancient tree. The journal belonged to a man named Thomas Ellsworth, a prospector who had worked the area during the 1850s. His entries, mostly mundane, took a sharp turn toward the strange after he described a series of disturbing events that unfolded around the time of the Ettin twins' disappearance. Ellsworth spoke of hearing strange noises in the night, whispers that seemed to come from the rocks themselves, voices that echoed in the wind. He described visions of two figures in the distance, figures that seemed to appear and disappear before his eyes, too quick to be fully seen but unmistakably human. Ellsworth believed these figures to be the Ettin twins, though he wrote with an eerie uncertainty. He spoke of feeling an unnatural chill in the air, as if something had changed in the very landscape, something ancient and unknowable. What's perhaps most unnerving about Ellsworth's account is his final entry. He described a place deep within the mountains, a hidden canyon where the landscape seemed to warp, as if time itself bent around the area. The canyon, he wrote, was filled with strange markings on the rocks, symbols that he could not decipher but felt an intense pull toward. And at the very edge of this place, he claimed to have seen the twins' footprints, but when he ventured forward, the trail led nowhere. The tracks vanished as if the twins had simply been swallowed by the earth itself. Ellsworth's account, though intriguing, raises more questions than it answers. Was he simply suffering from isolation and the effects of a harsh environment? Or did he truly witness something beyond human understanding, something tied to the disappearance of the twins? His journal was never found again, and those who later searched the area for the markings he described found nothing but more silence. To this day, the mystery of the Ettin twins' disappearance remains unsolved. The theories abound, ranging from the possibility of a tragic accident to more speculative ideas involving paranormal forces or even undiscovered caves and hidden passageways. Some believe the twins were taken by something far stranger than mere outlaws or hostile tribes. Could they have stumbled upon a place where the natural world itself seems to defy the laws of time and space? Was there something about the land they entered, something ancient and forgotten, that claimed them? The Wind River Range, with its towering peaks and deep valleys, is a place where the landscape feels as old as time itself. It is the kind of place where a person can easily vanish without a trace. And yet, there is something almost unsettling about how the twins seem to have disappeared, not just from the world, but from history. Was the land itself a silent witness to their fate? Or was there something darker, something more unexplained at work? The mystery of the Ettin twins is far from resolved, and as time marches on, it serves as a reminder that even in a world filled with maps and recorded history, there are still vast places where the unknown reigns, where stories are left to be told and mysteries are left unsolved. And so, we are left to wonder, what really happened to the Ettin twins, and what secrets are still buried in the wilderness, waiting to be uncovered? As we move deeper into the wild, untamed world of the American West, we now shift our gaze to a chilling event that took place far across the Atlantic, in the mist-cloaked moors of England. It was an event that defied scientific understanding, a storm that would remain etched in the annals of history, an occurrence so strange that it would leave an indelible mark on the collective memory of those who witnessed it. This is the story of the Widecombe thunderstorm event. The small village of Widecombe in the Moor, nestled in the rugged expanse of Dartmoor, Devon, sits on the edge of an eerie, almost otherworldly landscape. The vast moors, with their wind-swept grasslands and ancient stone circles, have long been a place of mystery and folklore. The area is known for its unpredictable weather, where dark clouds can gather without warning and the winds howl through the twisted bracken. On October 21st, 1638, the village of Widecombe became the center of a storm that defied natural explanation. On that fateful day, the villagers were gathered at St. Pancras Church, attending a Sunday service. The church, an imposing stone structure that stands as a testament to centuries of history, seemed to offer little protection against the wrath of nature. Suddenly, as if summoned by an unseen hand, the skies darkened. A violent thunderstorm swept across the moor, and as the congregation huddled together in fear, a bolt of lightning struck the church with an intensity never before witnessed. The thunderstorm was no ordinary storm. It was violent, sudden, and above all, mysterious. The villagers watched in horror as the bolt of lightning struck the steeple of the church, sending a shower of stones and debris crashing to the ground. The lightning seemed to possess an unnatural energy, as if the storm itself was more than just a weather phenomenon. The entire village was thrown into chaos, and yet, as quickly as it had begun, the storm passed, leaving behind a landscape that seemed untouched, except for the church, which bore the scars of the violent event. At first glance, this could easily be dismissed as just another tragic act of nature. But as the days passed, strange things began to happen. The villagers, who had witnessed the event firsthand, began to speak of an uncanny occurrence that took place during the storm. Several members of the congregation who had been near the church when the lightning struck began to suffer from a strange affliction. Some of them, after the storm had subsided, were found to be physically burned, their skin charred as if they had been directly struck by the bolt itself. Others reported hearing voices in the aftermath, strange whispers in the air, though no one else was around. The oddest and most terrifying reports came from those who claimed that they had seen figures, not of this world, standing amidst the storm, their forms fleeting and intangible. The event quickly became the subject of intense speculation. Some claimed that the storm was no ordinary thunderstorm at all, but rather the result of something far more sinister, a manifestation of some dark power. Superstitions and fears ran rampant, with many suggesting that the storm was a warning, a divine punishment for some unknown sin. Others turned to more earthly explanations, suggesting that the storm was the result of a rare and powerful meteorological phenomenon. But no one could explain the eerie way in which the lightning seemed to focus on the church, or the strange effects it had on those who had been in its path. The mystery of the Widecombe thunderstorm deepened over the centuries. Some believed that the church had been cursed, that the very land upon which it stood was plagued by forces beyond human understanding. Others speculated that the lightning had been part of a more natural phenomenon, such as an intense atmospheric discharge known as ball lightning, a rare and poorly understood electrical phenomenon that can appear as a floating orb of light, often accompanied by strange sounds and an eerie electric atmosphere. But even ball lightning, as strange as it is, could not fully account for the unusual effects that followed the event. As the years turned into centuries, the Widecombe thunderstorm event continued to haunt the village. The church, though repaired, became a place of quiet reverence and lingering mystery. Some say that, on stormy nights, the sound of a distant thunderclap can be heard, followed by a strange silence that seems to linger over the moors. The village remains a place where stories are told, where the past still whispers to those who listen closely enough. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the event is the eerie sense that something remains hidden, a secret locked away in the heart of Dartmoor, waiting to be uncovered. The strange effects of the storm, the eerie whispers, the reports of figures seen in the storm's aftermath, these elements have given rise to a range of theories, both scientific and supernatural. Could the storm have been an anomaly? A rare combination of atmospheric conditions that created a perfect storm of intensity? Or was it something far stranger? Some have suggested that the storm was not just a weather event, but a manifestation of a deep, ancient power that had been dormant in the moors for centuries. Dartmoor, after all, is a place rich with folklore. Stories of the Hound of Dartmoor, of ancient stones imbued with mysterious energies, and of a land that is said to hold more secrets than the earth is willing to reveal. Could the storm have been a sign? A moment when the veil between the living and the unseen was momentarily lifted? The Widecombe thunderstorm event remains one of the most unsettling and unexplained mysteries in English history. Even with the passing of hundreds of years, no clear answers have emerged. The storm's strange effects, the burned villagers, the whispering voices, each of these elements point to something that we, in our modern understanding of the world, struggle to comprehend. Could it be that, in a world governed by reason and science, there are still places where the natural world bends in ways we cannot predict or explain? The strange events at Widecombe in the moor leave us with a question that remains unanswered. Was the thunderstorm simply a freak of nature, or was it something far darker, something tied to the land itself? The mystery of the Widecombe thunderstorm event persists, and as we look to the past, we can't help but wonder, what, if anything, lies beyond the reach of our understanding, hidden in the storm's thunderous wake? As the northernmost point of mainland Norway, Vardø stands on the edge of the Arctic Ocean, a small yet haunting settlement surrounded by a desolate, windswept landscape. The town is a place where the nights stretch long in the winter, and the daylight in the summer seems almost too bright, a place where the elements themselves seem to test the limits of human endurance. Vardø's isolation is palpable, but it is not this isolation that has carved its place in history. It is, rather, the dark and tragic events that unfolded here centuries ago, the Vardø witch trials. The trials, which took place between 1600 and 1692, were part of a wider wave of witch hunts that gripped northern Europe during the late Renaissance. These trials, however, were particularly brutal and anomalous, marked by an intensity and scope that set them apart from others across the continent. More than 90 people, mostly women, were accused of witchcraft, and over 70 were executed, many of them burned at the stake. What made the Vardø witch trials particularly chilling were the strange and inexplicable elements that seemed to have surrounded them, elements that continued to defy logical explanation. In the shadow of the 17th century fortifications of Vardøhus fortress, the trials took on an atmosphere of the supernatural and the eerie. At the heart of this brutal chapter of history is the figure of the trial's primary prosecutor, Christian Jensen, who was the chief witch hunter in the region. It was under his command that the trials were carried out with a fervor that could rival the most infamous witch hunts of Europe. But it wasn't just the fervor that made these trials stand out. It was the sheer number of accusations and the strange circumstances surrounding them. The first notable anomaly in the Vardø witch trials is the speed with which they escalated. In a small town like Vardø, a few accusations would have been expected, but the witch hunts here seemed to spread like wildfire. The initial accusations began with a few isolated individuals, but before long, an entire community was swept up in the fervor. The fear of witches, those accused of consorting with the devil and causing misfortune, became a powerful weapon in the hands of religious and political authorities. But what makes the Vardø witch trials particularly mysterious is the strange nature of the accusations. Unlike the witch hunts in other parts of Europe, where accused witches were often said to have participated in Sabbaths or engaged in bizarre supernatural acts, Many of the allegations in Vardø were centered on the power of the accused to bring about storms. Women were accused of using witchcraft to cause tempests, which were believed to be responsible for the destruction of ships and the deaths of sailors, an especially devastating accusation in a community where fishing and seafaring were essential for survival. It is important to note that Vardø was a coastal town, with the constant threat of storms looming over its inhabitants. The surrounding waters were treacherous, and storms could appear seemingly out of nowhere, with devastating consequences. Were these women, accused of witchcraft, merely scapegoats for the unpredictable and often fatal weather patterns of the region? Or was there something more to the accusations, a deeper, more mysterious force at work? Some have suggested that the intensity of the witch hunts in Vardø could be linked to the climate itself. The late 16th and early 17th centuries were a period of dramatic climatic shifts, marked by the onset of what is now known as the Little Ice Age. This period, which saw cooler temperatures and more extreme weather events, could have caused an increase in storm activity along the northern coasts of Europe. Was the anxiety and fear surrounding these unpredictable storms simply projected onto vulnerable individuals in the form of witchcraft accusations? There is also the possibility that Vardø's geographic location played a role in amplifying the local superstitions and fears. Situated at the edge of the known world, Vardø was a place where strange and unexplained phenomena were more likely to be attributed to the supernatural. The isolation of the town and its position in a place where the forces of nature seemed unrelenting may have led to an overwhelming sense of helplessness. In such a harsh environment, could the people of Vardø have seen the unexplained storms as acts of witchcraft rather than natural occurrences? The human mind, in the face of extreme conditions, often seeks an explanation, and in a time of intense religious fervor, that explanation was often framed in supernatural terms. The second anomaly that stands out in the Vardø witch trials is the strange, often absurd nature of the evidence used to convict the accused. In many cases, the testimonies of neighbors, friends, and even family members were enough to seal the fate of an individual. But some of the accusations seem even more outlandish, such as the belief that women could transform into storm witches who controlled the weather by invoking the power of the devil. These supernatural beliefs were deeply rooted in folklore, but they were also used to manipulate the growing fear within the community. There is also the mystery surrounding the fate of the accused after they were convicted. In many cases, the accused women were not simply executed, they were tortured, often under brutal conditions, to extract confessions. It is unclear how many of the confessions were genuine and how many were made under duress, but one thing is certain: the process was designed not just to punish, but to break the spirit of the accused. What kind of emotional and psychological trauma could these women have experienced? Were they simply victims of superstition, or were they part of a larger, more inexplicable pattern of events that we still struggle to understand? One of the most unsettling aspects of the Vardø witch trials is the lingering sense that something is missing from the historical record. The testimonies and documents that survive from the trials are fragmented, and much of the evidence surrounding the events has been lost or deliberately destroyed. Some believe that there are clues buried beneath the surface of the region, hidden in the forgotten corners of the archive or in the long-silenced voices of the victims. Could there be something deeper, something more profound, that remains hidden in the dark pages of history? And as we look back on the Vardø witch trials, it becomes clear that this was not just an isolated event in a far-flung corner of the world. The accusations of witchcraft and the ensuing trials were part of a larger pattern of hysteria and fear that swept across Europe during this time. But the anomalies of Vardø, the strange accusations of storm witches, the inexplicable weather patterns, and the brutal convictions raise more questions than they answer. What caused the people of Vardø to believe so fiercely in the supernatural? And what of the powerful forces that seemed to drive the trials to their tragic conclusion? Perhaps, like so many mysteries of the past, the truth remains hidden just out of reach. The Vardø witch trials, with their strange and inexplicable elements, continue to haunt the quiet shores of the Arctic, leaving us to ponder the depths of fear, superstition, and human suffering. What really happened in Vardø, and what truths, if any, remain buried in the frozen earth of the past? The mystery endures. The waters off the southern coast of Spain, near the port city of Cádiz, are often calm, with the gentle sway of the tide lapping at the docks, a world seemingly untouched by time. But beneath the serene surface of the sea lies a mystery that has intrigued historians, sailors, and scholars for centuries. It is a story of a fleet, once mighty and feared, that seemingly vanished without a trace. This is the enigma of the silent fleet of Cádiz. In the early 18th century, Cádiz was a thriving naval stronghold, the beating heart of the Spanish Empire's naval power. The city sat on a narrow peninsula, surrounded by the windswept Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea, an ideal location for Spain's maritime forces. Here, in the year 1702, a fleet of 25 Spanish warships and their crew set sail, headed toward the Caribbean, tasked with bolstering Spanish authority in the New World. The fleet, under the command of Admiral Andrés de Pezuela, was part of Spain's ongoing struggle against the British and Dutch in the region. The mission was clear: to reinforce Spanish dominance over its colonies and safeguard its treasures. But something went terribly wrong. The fleet departed Cádiz under the cover of an early morning mist, the ships stretching across the horizon, their sails catching the wind as they disappeared into the distance. For days the fleet sailed, its presence noted by those who watched from the shores. Yet, just days after setting sail, something eerie began to unfold. A violent storm brewed off the coast, a tempest that, by all accounts, should have been survivable. But when the storm passed and the skies cleared, the fleet was nowhere to be found. No wreckage, no survivors, no indication of what had happened. What makes the silent fleet of Cádiz particularly puzzling is that, despite the scale of the operation, there was no formal record of the fleet's fate for months. When news finally reached Spain of its disappearance, it was as if the entire expedition had simply vanished into thin air. No survivors returned to report what had happened. No ships limped back into port. The fate of the fleet was left shrouded in mystery. The most widely accepted explanation at the time was that the fleet had been lost to the storm, an understandable assumption given the storm's ferocity. But there were anomalies that didn't sit well with this theory. For one, the storm was not particularly unusual for the region. The fleet, despite being heavily outnumbered, had experienced worse weather on previous voyages. Why then was the fleet so completely wiped out? There was no indication that the storm had sunk all of the ships, and no debris was found floating in the waters. As the years passed, a number of more speculative explanations began to emerge, each attempting to fill in the gaps left by the lack of concrete evidence. Some suggested that the fleet had encountered a more dangerous enemy, perhaps a rogue band of pirates or an opposing naval force waiting in the shadows. But the absence of battle scars or signs of conflict on any wreckage, if any were ever found, seems to rule out this explanation. Others proposed that the fleet had simply become lost or disoriented, drifting far off course in the storm and eventually sinking into the sea. However, this theory fails to account for the size of the fleet and the experience of its commanders. It seems unlikely that such a large, well-organized naval force could simply be scattered to the winds without leaving a trace of its passage. And then there are those who have suggested something far stranger, that the fleet encountered an inexplicable, otherworldly phenomenon. Given the region's history of mysterious sea events and the unexplained disappearances of ships in nearby waters, some have speculated that the fleet could have been swallowed by an area of the ocean known for strange currents and magnetic anomalies. This theory points to the possibility of a natural phenomenon that has yet to be fully understood by science, one that could explain the sudden disappearance of the ships, as well as the absence of any wreckage. Could it be that the fleet was lost to a force of nature so powerful and mysterious that it left no evidence behind? Yet another theory suggests that the fleet was the victim of some kind of sabotage or betrayal from within. Given the geopolitical tensions between Spain and other European powers, some have speculated that enemies within Spain might have worked covertly to bring down the fleet. There are even whispers of dark rumors that certain members of the Spanish Navy, unhappy with their orders, sabotaged the ships before they even left the harbor, or that there was an attempt to intentionally deceive the fleet into setting sail at the wrong time, knowing that a storm would wipe it out. The truth, however, remains elusive. Despite extensive investigations, no wreckage has ever been found that could definitively identify the lost fleet. No survivors returned with stories of miraculous escapes or harrowing struggles against the forces of nature. The silence surrounding the fate of the fleet is chilling, an unsettling void that has only deepened over time. Some have even speculated that the fleet's disappearance was not accidental at all, but was part of a greater naval conspiracy. In the years following the event, Spain struggled with internal strife, with corruption and political infighting threatening its stability. Could the fleet's sudden and mysterious disappearance have been orchestrated as part of a larger scheme to remove key naval officers or destabilize the empire's military capabilities? Though there is no concrete evidence to support this theory, it remains an intriguing possibility in a world where political maneuvering often spills over into darker, more secretive acts. Still, despite all the speculation, the truth remains as elusive as the fleet itself. For centuries, the fate of the silent fleet of Cádiz has remained one of the most enduring maritime mysteries of the 17th century. Was it simply a case of bad luck and poor weather, or was there something more at play? The lack of wreckage or survivors leaves us with an unnerving question. Could the fleet have vanished into some kind of unknown phenomenon, something beyond our current understanding of the natural world? Or was the fleet lost due to a failure of navigation, human error, or something darker still? As we look back on the mystery of the silent fleet of Cádiz, we are left with more questions than answers. What could have caused a fleet of this size, so vital to Spain's power, to vanish without a trace? The absence of evidence, the suddenness of the loss, and the decades of unanswered questions all point to one inescapable conclusion. Some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, hiding beneath the surface of the sea, waiting for a time when the truth may finally rise to the surface. What happened to the silent fleet of Cádiz? And could there be more such mysteries hidden in the deep, waiting to be uncovered by those brave enough to venture into the unknown? The ocean, after all, holds more secrets than we are able to comprehend. Perhaps, in the depths of its silent waters, the truth of this vanished fleet lies, waiting to be discovered. Or perhaps, it will remain a ghost in history, forever lost to time. As the golden sun dipped behind the jagged towers of the Château d'If, the cold, dark waters of the Mediterranean lapped against the stone walls, whispering secrets to those willing to listen. On this solitary island, far from the bustling streets of Paris, one of history's most confounding mysteries was born. It is a story steeped in shadows, in forgotten names, and in a prison cell that has haunted the minds of generations, the mystery of the man in the iron mask. In the late 17th century, the French court was a world of opulence and grandeur, ruled by the extravagant King Louis XIV. His reign, marked by unmatched wealth and military power, was also a time of secrecy, espionage, and political intrigue. Behind the gilded masks of the court, the machinery of power ground on relentlessly, and in the heart of this web of royal secrecy, one figure stood apart, his identity concealed, his face hidden behind a mask of iron. The story of the man in the iron mask has become one of the most tantalizing mysteries of the era. We know little of him with certainty, save for the fragmentary details that have trickled down through the centuries. He was imprisoned for over 3 decades, subjected to an unrelenting silence, and yet his name has never been definitively revealed. Who was this man? And why did Louis XIV, one of the most powerful monarchs in history, choose to keep him in such a state of complete obscurity? The first mention of the man in the iron mask comes from records associated with his imprisonment in the Bastille and later in the fortress of Pignerol. He was described as a man of imposing stature, though it was said that his identity was never to be spoken aloud, and no one was allowed to see his face. Those few who had glimpsed him reported that he wore a mask of iron, a grim and unnatural feature that struck fear into all who encountered him. Yet, in this cloud of secrecy, one simple question stands above all others. Who was he? Mainstream historical records are bafflingly sparse. He was arrested around 1669 and held in a series of French prisons until his death in 1703. Over the years, he was given several aliases, including Eustache Dogger, but none of these names provided any real clues to his true identity. It is believed that he was treated with the utmost care. His movements were closely guarded, and he was often surrounded by a small army of jailers and attendants, who, it seemed, were under strict orders to never reveal anything about him. These measures suggest that his imprisonment was far from ordinary. It was as if he was a living secret, a man whose very existence was designed to remain unknown. One of the most intriguing aspects of the man in the iron mask story is the role of King Louis XIV himself. It is said that the king was deeply invested in ensuring the man's identity remained concealed. The most plausible explanation is that the prisoner was someone of high birth, perhaps even a member of the royal family. Could he have been a twin brother of Louis XIV, hidden away to prevent a potential rival from claiming the throne? This theory is one of the most enduring, suggesting that the prisoner might have been a royal heir, perhaps born before Louis XIV, who was hidden away to preserve the legitimacy of the throne. But this remains speculation. No definitive evidence has ever surfaced to support this idea. Others have proposed that the man in the iron mask was a political prisoner, someone whose identity was suppressed because revealing it would have disrupted the balance of power. Some even believe he may have been a servant or someone who had witnessed a dangerous royal secret, perhaps even a lover of the king's mother, Queen Anne of Austria. In this theory, his mask could have been a way to protect him from the outside world and prevent him from revealing any inconvenient truths. One particularly popular theory connects the man in the iron mask to the story of the Comte de Vermandois, the son of Louis XIV's brother, Philippe I, Duke of Orleans. According to some historians, the man behind the mask was the Count, whose birth was shrouded in mystery and whose death occurred under strange circumstances. According to this line of thought, the Comte de Vermandois might have been a political pawn, used to keep the delicate fabric of the royal family intact. But even this theory has holes, as there is no concrete evidence to link the Comte de Vermandois to the mysterious prisoner. A more fringe theory suggests that the man was not a member of the royal family at all, but rather an ordinary man who had become embroiled in a royal conspiracy. Could it be that the man in the iron mask was a victim of political machinations, trapped in a web of royal deception for reasons entirely unrelated to his birth? The theory points to his lengthy imprisonment as proof that his identity was considered a matter of national importance, and yet he was not executed, merely hidden away for over 30 years. Adding to the intrigue, some have suggested that the man in the iron mask was a victim of some form of psychological manipulation. Was his mask a form of punishment or a psychological tool used to break him? The fact that he was forced to live out his days in solitude, stripped of any personal identity, might point to a deliberate effort to erase his very existence. Some historians even speculate that the mask itself might not have been made of iron, but instead of a less rigid material, something intended to ensure that the prisoner could never reveal his face to anyone. This would mean that the man's true identity was locked away, not only from the world, but from himself. The key to the mystery, however, may lie in the reasons for his imprisonment. The fact that he was held for so long, under such strict conditions, speaks to something far greater than a mere political or royal gesture. What was the secret that warranted such an extreme measure? What could have been so important that a man was hidden away in silence for decades? Despite countless theories, no one has ever been able to uncover the man in the iron mask's true identity. His story remains an enigma, a mystery woven into the complex fabric of French royal history. Theories have come and gone, each one tantalizing but ultimately unprovable. The man's death, as quiet and unceremonious as his life, left no final revelations, no letter, no confession, no final word. As we reflect on the man in the iron mask, we are faced with an unsettling realization. Some secrets, no matter how much we yearn to uncover them, may be lost to time forever. Was the man in the iron mask a royal heir, a political prisoner, or something entirely different? What was the truth behind his imprisonment, and why did the world never learn his name? The mystery remains. Perhaps it is a reminder that some stories, no matter how captivating or compelling, are not meant to be solved. Nestled in the opulent Catherine Palace of Tsarskoye Selo, just outside of St. Petersburg, Russia, there was once a room so extraordinary that it became known as the eighth wonder of the world. This room, known as the Amber Room, was a breathtaking marvel of craftsmanship. Entire walls were lined with gleaming amber panels, intricately carved and illuminated by golden light, their surfaces glistening with a warm, translucent glow. It was an exquisite fusion of art and nature, a room that seemed to shimmer with the richness of the Russian Empire at the height of its power. The Amber Room, created in the early 18th century, was a gift from the King of Prussia, Frederick I, to Tsar Peter the Great. In exchange, the Russian Empire sent craftsmen and artists to Prussia to design and build something equally magnificent. Over the years, the room was expanded and enhanced, becoming a symbol of opulence, royal patronage, and the artistic brilliance of the time. But as much as it was celebrated, the Amber Room was also mysterious, its construction and later disappearance steeped in enigma. By 1941, when World War II had cast its long shadow over Europe, the Amber Room's history took a dark turn. During the German invasion of the Soviet Union, the Nazis looted the Amber Room, stripping it of its treasures, and it was never seen again. The room was carefully disassembled and transported, but where it went, no one knew. The whereabouts of the Amber Room became one of the most tantalizing and enduring mysteries of the 20th century, sparking a search that would span decades. What makes the story of the Amber Room particularly chilling is not just the act of theft, but the haunting absence of any solid records from the early days of its creation and its subsequent disappearance. The room's origins, although well documented in the 18th century, were largely forgotten over time. It wasn't until the room's looting during World War II that its significance was fully realized. Despite the room's importance as a symbol of Russian heritage, there are still gaps in the historical record that make its story as elusive as it is fascinating. The records that exist from the early days of the Amber Room's creation are scant, shrouded in a veil of mystery. While we know that the room was initially installed in Catherine Palace in the 18th century and was later expanded under the reign of Empress Elizabeth, much about its early history remains unclear. Who were the craftsmen who built the room? What inspired the detailed designs that covered its walls? with their delicate patterns and intricate inlays of amber, gold, and mirrors? These questions remain unanswered. Interestingly, while there are some written records from the 18th century detailing the Amber Room's creation and its placement within the palace, these records are inconsistent. Some historians have even suggested that the room's design and assembly were more collaborative than previously believed, with several European artisans contributing to the final product. But the early accounts are vague, offering only fragmented glimpses into what must have been a monumental task, one that spanned years and involved some of the best craftsmen of the time. Yet, the mystery surrounding the Amber Room extends beyond its creation. In 1941, as the Nazi forces advanced into Soviet territory, they set their sights on the Amber Room, seeing it as one of the great treasures of Europe. What followed was a complex and seemingly meticulous operation to dismantle the room and transport its pieces back to Germany. But when the room was taken, its records vanished with it. The Nazis, in their efficiency and secrecy, erased any trace of where the Amber Room went or how it was disassembled. One theory suggests that the room was taken to Königsberg, now Kaliningrad, where it was stored in a secret location before being lost to the advancing Soviet forces. The chaos of the war, the shifting borders, and the eventual collapse of the Nazi regime added further layers of confusion. The room may have been hidden in plain sight, hidden in a warehouse or a private collection. But if it was lost during the war, why has no solid trace of it ever surfaced? After the war, the search for the Amber Room intensified. Numerous expeditions and investigations have been launched over the decades, yet the room's fate remains a riddle. In the 1970s, some claimed that the Amber Room had been burned or destroyed during air raids, but others countered that the treasures were simply hidden away, too valuable to destroy. Over the years, rumors of secret hoards and hidden caches have surfaced, with many suggesting that the Amber Room was concealed by those who knew its worth. But no one has ever been able to definitively prove any of these claims. One particularly fascinating theory involves the notion that the Amber Room was not lost, but rather intentionally hidden, its location kept secret by those who knew of its value. Some historians have speculated that the room may have been smuggled out of Königsberg before the Red Army arrived, hidden in a private collection or a distant warehouse. Could it still exist today, carefully preserved by a secretive collector or tucked away in some forgotten corner of the world? Other theories venture further into the realm of the unexplained, suggesting that the Amber Room may have been hidden by occultists, or that its disappearance is connected to more mystical forces. The very materials used in the Amber Room, amber, gold, and mirrors, were historically believed to have symbolic and even magical properties. Could it be that the room's disappearance was part of a larger, darker plan, connected to ancient beliefs or powers beyond our understanding? More recently, a fascinating theory posited by some researchers is that the room may have been hidden in a network of underground tunnels beneath Königsberg, or even within the remains of buildings destroyed during the war. Could it be that the Amber Room was never lost, but rather buried beneath the rubble, waiting to be rediscovered? Some have even speculated that the room could be hidden in plain sight, behind false walls or in undiscovered chambers, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Yet despite these theories and countless searches, the Amber Room has never been recovered. The Soviets, after regaining control of the area, attempted to restore the room, recreating it in Catherine Palace in 2003 using photographs and surviving fragments. The new Amber Room, a remarkable and painstakingly accurate reconstruction, stands as a symbol of Russia's determination to reclaim its heritage. But it is, after all, just a replica, one that raises more questions than it answers. Could the real Amber Room still exist, hidden somewhere in the vast, forgotten corners of the world? Or is it lost to history, swallowed by the chaos of war and the passage of time? As with many of history's great mysteries, the answer may never be fully known. The Amber Room's disappearance remains one of the great unsolved mysteries of the 20th century, and as we look back on its creation, its beauty, and its loss, we are left to wonder, what exactly is still hidden beneath the surface of the past, waiting to be uncovered? The frost had settled across the English countryside, covering the earth in a thin, sparkling layer of ice. The small village of Exeter lay quiet in the early morning hours, its streets still and its cottages shrouded in the mist of a new day. But in the winter of 1855, something inexplicable occurred, something that would turn the calm of the village into a landscape of terror and wonder. On the morning of January 8th, villagers woke to find their peaceful world disrupted by a strange and terrifying phenomenon, a series of mysterious, unexplained footprints. At first glance, the tracks were nothing unusual, just footprints in the snow. But as the villagers followed the trail, their unease deepened. The prints did not belong to any known creature. They appeared to be cloven, resembling the hooves of a large animal, but the shape was distinctly unnatural, more human than any common beast. The footprints seemed to stretch across miles of land, covering a vast expanse of the countryside, yet no one had seen the creature that made them. The tracks appeared overnight, as if conjured by some unseen force, and with them, the shadow of something ancient and unknown seemed to have fallen over the village. The Devil's footprints, as they came to be known, were not just limited to a single location. They spread across a broad area of southern England, stretching through towns and villages, crossing fields, over walls, and even along rooftops. The footprints seemed to defy all logic. There were no breaks, no gaps, no indication that the creature had stopped or rested. The prints were remarkably uniform in their design, cloven-hoofed, about 8 to 16 inches long, and spaced evenly apart. The mystery, however, was not in the footprints themselves, but in the sheer impossibility of their existence. What kind of creature could leave such a trail, one that appeared to walk through the most unlikely places, across roofs, up walls, and over gates? The trail seemed to follow a deliberate path, but no one had seen the creature responsible. Villagers began to speculate wildly, and with those speculations came theories, myths, and even fear. For many, the answer was obvious. These were the footprints of the devil himself, a supernatural being that had somehow manifested on earth, leaving his mark on the land as a warning of evil. The idea that Satan had walked among them, leaving his cloven tracks in the snow, was not just a passing superstition. At the time, England was rife with religious anxiety, and any unexplained phenomenon was often linked to a manifestation of evil. The footprints were seen as a dark omen, a sign that something malevolent had visited the earth. But were these truly the marks of the devil, or was there another, more rational explanation? As time passed, theories began to emerge, trying to explain away the strange phenomenon. Some suggested that the prints were made by an animal, perhaps a large, rare creature, or even a foreign beast that had wandered into the country. However, no known animal could have made such a vast and varied trail. The prints didn't match any recorded species, and the tracks that crossed roofs and fences seemed to defy the possibility of any animal, let alone one that could be traveling across such distances without leaving any trace of its passage. Another theory suggested that the footprints were the result of some human trickery, an elaborate hoax designed to frighten the local population. It was posited that a person, or a group of people, had created the prints using some kind of tool or device to mimic the appearance of hoof prints. Yet this theory also had its flaws. The prints were too consistent, too widespread, and in some cases, the footprints appeared in areas where it would have been difficult for a human to leave such a mark. The footprints weren't confined to a single area. They stretched for miles, crossing over difficult terrain, with no apparent gaps or breaks. A more speculative theory suggests that the tracks were the result of a rare natural phenomenon, perhaps related to the movement of animals that could create prints in the snow but were otherwise unseen by human eyes. Some have speculated that the footprints were caused by a local animal, possibly a misidentified or previously unknown species, which left these peculiar marks. However, no one has ever been able to definitively identify an animal that could have caused such an event. But what if the answer lies not in the natural or physical world, but in something far more mysterious? Could the devil's footprints be linked to some form of supernatural or otherworldly force? The phenomenon was not an isolated event. Over the centuries, there have been other reports of similar sightings. Footprints that appear without explanation, tracks that seem to defy logic and reason. In many ways, the devil's footprints are part of a much older, more enigmatic tradition of unexplained marks and signs in folklore, from the footprints of mythical creatures to the mysterious devil's tracks found across cultures. Is it possible that these footprints represent something much deeper? An ancient force or presence that exists just beyond the reach of human understanding? The idea that the footprints might be a supernatural manifestation linked to the occult, spiritual beliefs, or forgotten myths is one that continues to linger in the back of our minds. Could the devil's footprints be a sign of something more? An entity, a force, or an event beyond our grasp? Despite centuries of speculation, the devil's footprints remain one of England's greatest unsolved mysteries. No one has been able to conclusively explain the origins of the marks, and the theories surrounding them are as varied and perplexing as the footprints themselves. Even in modern times, some believe the tracks are a sign of a much larger and more unsettling mystery, one that challenges our understanding of reality and leaves us with a chilling question. What exactly made those footprints? And could they be a sign of something darker, something that remains hidden just beneath the surface of our world, waiting to be discovered? As we look back at this strange event, one thing is certain. The devil's footprints are a reminder that there are still mysteries lurking in the shadows, unsolved and unexplained. What might still be hidden in the quiet corners of history, waiting to be uncovered by those brave enough to seek the truth? On a quiet stretch of coastline, far from the bustling centers of political power, the little-known tale of the lost Japanese embassy members remains one of history's most unsettling and enigmatic mysteries. The story begins in 1871, during a time when Japan was undergoing a profound transformation, shifting from centuries of isolation under the Tokugawa shogunate into a rapidly modernizing imperial power. In this period of change, the Meiji Restoration had opened the doors of Japan to the wider world, and one of the key components of this diplomatic outreach was the establishment of embassies in foreign lands. The story of these lost diplomats is tied to one such mission, a diplomatic mission that was to be dispatched by Japan to the United States. The mission, meant to strengthen ties and formalize diplomatic relations between the two nations, began with great promise. A group of Japanese diplomats, scholars, and their entourage set sail from Yokohama, Japan, aboard a ship known as the Konrin Maru. It was 1860, and this mission was one of the earliest and most ambitious attempts by Japan to establish itself as a modern nation on the global stage. However, what was intended to be a proud moment for Japan took a dark turn when the Konrin Maru made its way across the Pacific Ocean, bound for the U.S. It was an era of naval exploration, and the journey was perilous, but no one could have predicted that this particular voyage would unravel into one of the greatest unexplained disappearances in diplomatic history. Upon their arrival, the members of the Japanese embassy were greeted with the formalities of the time, meeting with U.S. diplomats, attending ceremonies, and engaging in discussions on trade, culture, and technology. But as weeks passed, a troubling pattern emerged. The diplomats from the embassy, who had been so eager and visible in their arrival, began to disappear one by one. The first to vanish was the chief of the mission, a high-ranking Japanese official. He disappeared without a trace, leaving no note, no explanation, and no clue as to his whereabouts. The disappearance was so sudden that it caused a stir, but it was treated with a degree of quiet diplomatic decorum. His absence was simply explained away as personal matters or an unspoken reason. As days turned into weeks, others began to disappear from the embassy staff. Familiar faces that once engaged in discussions about treaties, trade, and the future of Japanese-American relations. One by one, the members of the mission faded into the shadows, with no concrete explanation. Some said they had left on private matters. Others claimed they had simply gone for walks and never returned. But as the days turned into months, the whispers grew louder. Where had these men gone? And why had they vanished without any official explanation? The official accounts, over time, began to diverge from the facts that people began to speculate. Some believed the men were either kidnapped or taken under mysterious circumstances, perhaps by political forces who sought to halt the mission or disrupt the fragile peace between Japan and the U.S. Others thought they had disappeared into the unknown, perhaps to live in exile or to start a new life. Yet, despite the attempts to understand the missing diplomat's fate, the truth remained obscured, as more and more people who might have known the answers drifted away into silence. In the years that followed, theories began to circulate about what had really happened to these diplomats. One popular explanation centered around a failed attempt at political asylum. Could it be that the missing men had turned against their government, seeking refuge or protection in the United States from the weight of their responsibilities? Such a scenario, though not impossible, seemed unlikely given the importance of the mission. If they had truly been seeking political asylum, why had they disappeared so suddenly and without a trace? Another theory, more speculative in nature, suggested that the diplomats may have become involved in some sort of secretive political maneuver, perhaps caught in the middle of espionage or a diplomatic conspiracy. At the time, Japan was still a nation transitioning from its feudal past to a more modern imperial state. Tensions were high, both internally within Japan and externally, as Western powers vied for influence over East Asia. It's possible, some believe, that the diplomat's disappearance was part of some larger political game, an intentional disappearance engineered by forces who had an interest in seeing the mission fail. But as intriguing as these theories are, none provide the closure that so many have sought. Theories involving kidnapping or espionage remain speculative at best. With each passing year, the mystery deepens. Historical records from the time remain fragmented, offering tantalizing glimpses into the events, but no definitive answer has ever been found. The lost diplomats, along with the rest of the missing embassy members, remain figures shrouded in silence. Their disappearances are not chronicled in any great detail in official histories, and many questions remain unanswered. In fact, the mystery only deepens when we consider the strange events surrounding the embassy's final moments in the United States. After the disappearances, the embassy's mission was quietly shut down, with little fanfare. Diplomatic ties between Japan and the United States continued, but the incident of the lost diplomats was swept under the rug, brushed aside as an unfortunate but inconclusive chapter in the story of early international relations. There are those, however, who believe that the lost Japanese embassy members were victims of something darker and more inexplicable. Some claim that these diplomats were the victims of a secret society or a hidden force that sought to control their fate. Others suggest that their disappearance was linked to a larger, ongoing conflict within Japan itself, an internal struggle within the government or military that sought to silence those who were considered a threat to the nation's future. A fringe theory that has persisted over time suggests that the diplomats may have fallen victim to some kind of supernatural force. This theory posits that the embassy, being so far from home and in unfamiliar territory, may have become entangled with dark forces that acted as agents of fate, dragging the diplomats into the void. The idea that supernatural elements could be responsible for their disappearance plays on the human tendency to imagine the unknown in fantastical terms, giving life to the mystery in ways that defy ordinary explanation. Still, no concrete evidence has ever emerged to suggest that the lost members were victims of espionage, political conspiracy, or supernatural forces. Their fate remains a tantalizing yet unsolved mystery. The exact circumstances of their disappearance remain shrouded in a fog of uncertainty, and their story has, over time, become part of a larger, more elusive history of unexplained events. Could the truth behind the disappearance of the lost Japanese embassy members still be hidden away, buried under layers of history and diplomatic secrecy? Is there more to their story, more that we are yet to understand? As we peel back the layers of time and attempt to reconstruct what happened to these figures, we are left with a haunting question. What other hidden truths may yet be waiting to emerge from the shadows of history, and what secrets might still be lost, waiting to be uncovered? In the cold, windswept heart of Russia, the Kremlin stands as a symbol of power and mystery. It is a place steeped in history, where grand figures have lived, ruled, and disappeared under circumstances that often remain clouded in uncertainty. But there is one death that has lingered in the shadows of Russian history, a death so shrouded in intrigue that it has sparked endless speculation. The death of Tsar Feodor I, the last of the Rurik dynasty, in 1598. Feodor I, the son of Ivan the Terrible, was a ruler whose reign marked the end of an era. His death, which should have been a simple, straightforward event in the history of the Russian monarchy, became something far more mysterious. Feodor was not a strong or charismatic ruler. He had little involvement in the day-to-day affairs of state, leaving much of the governance to his advisors, particularly his mother, the ambitious and cunning Tsarina Anastasia Romanovna. But in the years leading up to his death, there was one thing he was known for: his increasing mental instability. Feodor I's reign had been marked by his apparent inability to rule effectively. In his later years, rumors of his ill health and erratic behavior spread. It was widely believed that he suffered from a form of epilepsy or some other mental affliction. As Tsar, he was often seen as weak and ineffective, and it seemed the Russian Empire was slipping out of his grasp. However, the exact nature of his illness and the circumstances surrounding his sudden and unexpected death would become the subject of deep mystery. Feodor's death came on January 7th, 1598. Officially, the cause of death was listed as natural, an illness, some say a fever, that had taken hold of him in the days before his passing. But the surrounding events and the atmosphere of the court at the time paint a far more enigmatic picture. Feodor had been unwell for some time, but reports of his death were strangely timed. Why had it taken the court so long to confirm his death? Why were there delays in the announcement? Why did the Russian people hear nothing for several days? Rumors began to swirl almost immediately. Some whispered that Feodor had been murdered, poisoned by those close to him, perhaps even by his own relatives. The possibility of political intrigue cannot be ruled out. After all, Feodor's reign had been plagued by a lack of power, and there were many who sought to take control of the throne. In a time when power was everything, the sudden death of a weak ruler could offer a prime opportunity for rivals to seize the throne. The most compelling theory is that of a deliberate assassination, though no concrete evidence has ever been found to support this. In the years following Feodor's death, several prominent figures, including his trusted boyars, noble advisors, and members of his court, came under suspicion. The Tsar's lack of children and the instability of his reign made the transition of power a delicate matter. And yet, There was something unsettling about the manner in which Feodor's death was handled. So many questions were left unanswered, and so many details seemed to be glossed over in official accounts. One of the most intriguing and unsettling aspects of Feodor's death is the disappearance of the autopsy records. For a time, it was assumed that the Tsar had been simply too ill to recover. Yet, with his sudden death, the decision to withhold any examination of his body or the official cause of death raised suspicion. Why was the autopsy never conducted? Was there something the Russian court was trying to hide? This lack of transparency led to an explosion of rumors. Some suggested that Tsar Feodor I had not died from natural causes at all. One of the most dramatic theories suggests that the Tsar had been buried alive, an idea that, though fantastical, fit with the mysterious circumstances of the time. Was it possible that Feodor, in his weakened state, had slipped into a coma or had been mistakenly declared dead? The idea that his death might have been misdiagnosed, with him later waking in his tomb, is a chilling one, and yet it is a theory that has persisted through the centuries. Even more unsettling are the tales that emerged from the time of Feodor's death that suggest a darker, more sinister plot. Some have speculated that the Tsar's family, particularly his cousin Boris Godunov, who would go on to become the next Tsar of Russia, may have been involved in his untimely death. Godunov was a powerful figure in Russian politics at the time and had designs on the throne. With Fyodor's sudden and unexplained death, he swiftly ascended to power, and many have wondered if his rise to the throne was merely the result of fortune, or if it was part of a more deliberate plan. Could Godunov have orchestrated Fyodor's death? Did he have the support of others within the court? There are no concrete records to suggest any foul play on Godunov's part, but the timing of Fyodor's death and Godunov's rapid rise to power have fueled the speculation. It's worth noting that Godunov's own reign was marked by instability and distrust, and his eventual downfall further deepens the mystery surrounding Fyodor's death. The connection between the two men, Fyodor, the frail, mentally unstable Tsar, and Godunov, the ambitious and politically shrewd cousin, adds another layer of intrigue to the already mysterious circumstances surrounding Fyodor's death. Yet, as we dig deeper into the events surrounding Fyodor's demise, we begin to see that the mystery of his death might lie in the very fabric of Russian history itself. At the time of his death, Russia was experiencing profound political, social, and cultural changes. The power struggles that had defined the reigns of his predecessors were continuing to ripple through the court, and the sheer instability of the period could have played a part in the cloud of uncertainty that surrounded Fyodor's passing. There is one final theory, one that suggests Fyodor's death might have been tied to a larger, more complex web of intrigue, the mysterious and often dangerous political world of the Russian court. The idea that Feodor was the victim of a political conspiracy in which his own family and advisors played key roles remains one of the most compelling. But even this theory, as chilling as it may seem, still leaves many unanswered questions. As we reflect on the mysterious death of Tsar Feodor I, we are left with more questions than answers. Was he the victim of natural causes, a political conspiracy, or something far more sinister? Was his death the result of a struggle for power within the court, or did something darker influence the course of events? The answers to these questions remain locked in the annals of history, where they continue to haunt us, leaving us to wonder, what really happened to Tsar Feodor I, and why does his death remain one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in Russian history? The story of the Green Children of Woolpit has intrigued and mystified historians, folklorists, and curious minds for centuries. Set against the quiet backdrop of rural England in the 12th century, it's a tale that blends the ordinary with the inexplicable, leaving us with more questions than answers. The small village of Woolpit, situated in Suffolk, had been home to many peaceful lives, but one summer, The peaceful rhythm of the land was shattered by the appearance of two strange children, green-skinned, foreign in their manner, and completely unlike anyone the villagers had ever seen before. The children, a brother and sister, were discovered around a wolf pit, an area where wolves were once trapped, which lent the village its name. Found by farmers who were working the fields, these children were unlike any others. Their skin was said to be green, their clothes were unfamiliar and rudimentary, and they could not speak any known language. Terrified yet fascinated, the villagers took the children into their care, unsure of what to make of them. What followed was a series of events that would have been considered extraordinary even by today's standards. The children were taken to the home of Sir Richard de Calme, a local landowner, where they were fed and cared for. Over time, they began to speak, but their language was unknown to anyone in the village. They also only ate raw beans, an odd and seemingly inexplicable preference. Eventually, the boy fell ill and died, but the girl survived and gradually adapted to life in England. She lost her green tint, learned English, and began to explain her story, though it only deepened the mystery. According to her account, she and her brother had come from a place called St. Martin's Land, a strange realm where everything was different. Its inhabitants were not like the people of Woolpit, and their world was bathed in a perpetual twilight. This land, she claimed, was a hidden place, one that could only be reached by some unknown means. The children, she said, had wandered into the human world by accident, somehow entering a land of light, warmth, and strange customs. When they were found in Woolpit, they were bewildered and frightened, having somehow crossed into a realm far from home. The girl's story, of a land that seemed to exist outside the known world, echoes across centuries, sparking the imaginations of those who have heard it. Was it a metaphor? A tale created by a young girl struggling to make sense of the world she had been thrust into? Or was there more to this story than meets the eye? Was it possible that the green children had indeed come from another realm? Or was there something else, something more earthly, behind their strange appearance and strange tale? As the decades passed, the mystery of the green children faded into legend, but the story did not die. In fact, the tale resurfaced over the years, gaining new twists and interpretations. Some believed that the children's green skin could be explained by some form of malnutrition, such as a condition called chlorosis, a disease that causes a greenish tint to the skin due to a lack of iron in the blood. Others suggested that the children were simply suffering from some form of shock or mental distress after having been lost or abandoned in the wilds of the countryside. Perhaps they were simply refugees, orphans with strange and tragic circumstances, whose appearance and language were misinterpreted as something otherworldly. But there is one intriguing fact that cannot be easily dismissed. The girl, after surviving and learning English, went on to live a relatively normal life. She eventually married and had children of her own, though much of her early life remains shrouded in mystery. Her claim of coming from an alternate world, one hidden away from human eyes, lingers in the back of the mind. Could it be possible that her story was more than just a child's fantasy, a product of a mind struggling to understand the strange world into which she had been thrust? Or was it a genuine memory, a glimpse into a reality beyond our own? And then there's the matter of the later sightings of green children. While the initial case of the green children from Woolpit is often cited as the beginning of this strange phenomenon, it is not the only one. Over the centuries, there have been a handful of other reported sightings, children, or sometimes even adults, with similarly unusual skin tones. These later sightings seem to mirror the original tale in many ways. Strange behavior, odd appearances, and an air of mystery surrounding their origins. In 1890, for example, in the town of Devon, England, another set of green children was reportedly seen. This time, the children were described as having a glowing greenish hue, and their language was incomprehensible. just like the ones found in Woolpit. No one ever learned who they were, where they came from, or what had happened to them, but their presence again raised eyebrows and piqued the curiosity of the local population. Moreover, similar reports of children with unusual skin tones, ranging from greenish hues to shades that could not easily be explained, have emerged across various parts of the world. From rural villages to urban centers, the stories have surfaced, sometimes with uncanny parallels to the original Woolpit tale. Yet despite these later reports, no definitive explanation has ever been provided, and many of these sightings remain unexplained, filed away in the annals of unsolved mysteries. The question lingers: what are we to make of these strange events? Are they simply the product of vivid imaginations, the misinterpretations of isolated witnesses, or could there be a deeper, more inexplicable truth behind them? Some have suggested that the green children are merely a psychological manifestation, a collective folklore motif arising in times of social upheaval or unknown fear. Others have looked toward scientific explanations, like rare genetic disorders or alien encounters, though neither of these theories provide any concrete evidence. Some even suggest that the sightings could be connected to early accounts of time travelers or alternate dimensions, where children from another time or from a world parallel to our own found their way into our reality, though this is a theory that remains purely speculative. More recently, the re-emergence of these stories has led some to consider the idea of forgotten histories or ancient encounters. Could the green children, both in Woolpit and elsewhere, have been survivors of some long-lost civilization, some society that was hidden from the world? Did they speak of strange lands because they had crossed the borders of the known world into something that has since been erased from the history books? Despite the many theories, the answers remain elusive. The mystery of the green children, though steeped in folklore, seems to carry with it an undeniable thread of truth, a sense of something more, something unknown that has echoed through time. The sightings continue to provoke wonder and speculation, inviting us to ask, what truly happened to these children? Where did they come from, and why did their stories remain so elusive? As we search for answers, we can't help but wonder if some mysteries, no matter how many times we revisit them, are simply too strange and too distant for us to fully comprehend. The story of Henry Every, one of the most notorious pirates to ever sail the seas during the so-called Golden Age of piracy, is one that has tantalized historians, scholars, and adventurers for centuries. His name is synonymous with ruthless ambition, treasure, and daring escapes, but it is also tied to one of the most enduring mysteries of the period: his sudden disappearance, which has never been fully explained. It was the late 17th century, a time when the high seas were ruled by fierce and often lawless men, their ships as unpredictable as the waters they sailed. Every, sometimes known as Henry Avery or Long Ben, was no exception. His career as a pirate began with a swift rise to fame, one that would see him at the helm of one of the most infamous piracy operations in history. The man himself was something of an enigma. Little is known about his early life, with most details remaining shrouded in uncertainty. Some say he was born in England, though records are scarce. Others claim he came from a humble background, working as a sailor before finding his fortune on the high seas. Regardless of his origins, what is clear is that by the 1690s, Henry Every was already making waves in the pirate world. His most famous act, one that would cement his place in pirate legend, was the capture of the Gowrie Conspiracy in 1695, a Mughal ship sailing from India to Mecca. The ship was a treasure-laden prize, and when Every and his crew seized it, they found themselves in possession of immense wealth, an estimated 600,000 pounds worth of treasure, a fortune that would rival anything in the annals of piracy. The attack on the Gowrie Conspiracy was swift and brutal, and despite the fact that the ship was a Mughal vessel, Every's piracy was far-reaching, crossing into the delicate and volatile political landscape of the time. It was said that his actions angered the Mughal Empire so much that they issued a bounty for his capture, one that stretched across continents. Yet, for all the success of this heist, it was also the beginning of his downfall. The loot, the fame, and the attention it brought him may have been the very elements that sealed his fate. Soon after the Ganges Sawai incident, Evry's ship, the Fancy, was surrounded by danger, fleeing not only from the authorities, but from rival pirates and naval forces alike. This was the point when the stories about Evry began to diverge into the realm of legend. In 1696, following the spectacular Ganges Sawai heist, Evry mysteriously vanished. His crew scattered, some of them fleeing to remote corners of the world to escape both the law and the wrath of those seeking retribution. The Fancy, the ship that had once been feared across the seas, was abandoned, and Evry himself disappeared from the historical record. There are few records of his activities following his piracy in the 1690s, and no clear trace of his movements in the years after. This sudden disappearance has become the cornerstone of Evry's legend. Unlike many of his contemporaries, who met gruesome ends at the hands of the law, Evry's fate remains unclear. Did he escape with his treasure and live out his life in secret, far from the prying eyes of the authorities? Or was he betrayed by his own crew and left to perish at sea? The mystery of what happened to Henry. Evry has lingered for over 300 years, and yet there is no definitive answer. Several theories have emerged over the years, each more speculative than the last. The most widely accepted theory suggests that Evry, after securing his treasure, simply retired from piracy. This theory posits that he used his wealth to disappear into obscurity, perhaps living out his days as a wealthy merchant or a common man, hiding in plain sight. Some reports suggest that he fled to the Caribbean or even to America, though these claims remain unsubstantiated. Another theory claims that he may have traveled to Europe, perhaps seeking refuge in places like France or Spain, where he could enjoy his ill-gotten fortune without the constant threat of being captured. There is another, more chilling theory that suggests Evry met a violent end at the hands of his own crew. Some historians believe that the pirates, having secured their riches, may have turned on their leader, either out of greed or fear of being pursued. There are rumors of a mutiny aboard the Fancy, of Evry being murdered by his own men. However, like many of the theories surrounding his death, these accounts are based more on hearsay and conjecture than on verified historical records. Perhaps the most bizarre and captivating theory suggests that Evry did not die at all, but rather that he found a way to elude capture and continue living as a fugitive. Some have speculated that he may have faked his own death, using the chaos of the high seas and the growing interest in his bounty as a cover to disappear into the vastness of the world. If this theory holds any truth, it would mean that Henry Evry's story is far from over, that he could have lived for many more years, quietly enjoying the wealth he had accumulated. And yet, for all the theories, no definitive proof has ever been uncovered to confirm what happened to Evry. His disappearance remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of the golden age of piracy. The Fancy was never found again, nor was any definitive evidence of Evry's whereabouts discovered. The questions surrounding his disappearance are not only tantalizing, they are deeply unsettling. In an age when many pirates met violent ends, either by the gallows or the sea, why did Evry slip through the cracks of history? Was he simply lucky? Or was there something more to his story than we will ever know? As we investigate the mystery of Henry Evry's disappearance, we find ourselves standing on the edge of a vast unknown, much like the pirate himself must have felt all those centuries ago. The sea, with its endless horizons and hidden depths, has always been a place where truths are buried and mysteries are born. Henry Evry may have been one of the most notorious pirates in history, but his end remains as elusive as the treasure he sought so desperately. Perhaps that's the ultimate mystery. Was he a master of evasion, or was his disappearance part of a greater, more dangerous game? A game where the truth is as elusive as the very waters he sailed upon. As the centuries pass, the legend of Henry Every continues to haunt the imaginations of those who are drawn to the world of pirates and the mysteries of the sea. What happened to him? Did he truly escape with his fortune, or did the ocean claim him as it has claimed so many others? As we search for answers, we must remember that the sea is full of mysteries, some that are waiting to be discovered, and others that may never reveal their secrets. And so, the story of Henry Every remains a riddle, lost to time, leaving us to wonder, did the most infamous pirate of his age live out his days in the shadows, or did he simply vanish into the depths of history, never to be heard from again? The village of Salem, Massachusetts, sits quietly today, its cobblestone streets and colonial architecture offering little hint of the terrifying history that once unfolded there. In 1692, however, Salem became the epicenter of one of the most infamous episodes in American history, the Salem witch trials. For months, the town was engulfed in hysteria, fear, and a fervor that led to the deaths of 20 innocent people and the imprisonment of countless others. But what caused this eruption of violence, this unrelenting wave of accusations, fear, and death? Was it the result of an unexplainable supernatural force, or were there darker, more earthly forces at play? At the heart of the Salem witch trials is a question that has never been fully answered. What led a community to so fully embrace the belief that witches, those who consorted with the devil, were hiding among them? In the cold, tight-knit Puritan community of Salem, where religion governed every aspect of life, accusations of witchcraft were not just considered a crime, they were a matter of spiritual life and death. The origins of the trials are often traced to the Reverend Samuel Parris, whose daughter, Elizabeth, and niece, Abigail Williams, began displaying strange symptoms in early 1692, fits, convulsions, and uncontrollable outbursts. They claimed to be afflicted by witches, and soon, other young girls in the town began exhibiting similar symptoms. Soon, the whispers of witchcraft spread like wildfire through the village, transforming what was once a quiet, hard-working community into a boiling cauldron of fear, suspicion, and accusations. The initial spark of fear was not ignited by any visible sign of witchcraft. It wasn't as though Salem had been witness to any overtly supernatural occurrences that could confirm the children's claims. Instead, the fears were fed by a long-standing belief in the power of the devil and his ability to infiltrate the most pious of communities. The Puritans, whose strict faith governed their worldview, believed that the devil could manifest himself in many forms, and those who were marked by him would have the ability to cast spells and manipulate others in terrible ways. But why did it all happen in Salem? And why did it happen when it did? Could it have been an isolated outburst of religious fervor? Or were there underlying forces that led to this eruption of paranoia? Historians have pondered this question for centuries, and many theories have been offered, some more grounded in historical fact than others. One of the earliest theories suggests that the Salem witch trials were a direct response to the pressures and tensions building within the community. The late 17th century was a time of instability in Salem, and the trials may have been a reaction to the deep anxiety felt by the Puritans. A harsh, unforgiving climate, combined with the recent wars with Native American tribes and the specter of disease and famine, had created an atmosphere of constant fear. The Puritans, whose rigid religious beliefs left little room for deviation, may have been inclined to see the hand of the devil in any misfortune or unexplained event. Another theory posits that the trials were the result of political and social rivalries within Salem. The town was deeply divided, with factions vying for power and influence. In some ways, The accusations of witchcraft were less about faith and more about power. Women, often marginalized in Puritan society, were suddenly thrust into the spotlight, where accusations of witchcraft could destroy not just their lives, but the lives of their entire families. This theory suggests that some accusations were motivated by personal grudges, land disputes, or a desire for vengeance, all disguised behind the veil of religious fervor. Perhaps the most chilling theory, however, is that the accusations and trials were driven by the growing influence of the mass hysteria that seemed to grip the town. As the number of accused witches began to grow, so too did the fervor with which the trials were conducted. What began as a few isolated accusations spiraled out of control, fed by the fear of the unknown. People began to turn on their neighbors, convinced that anyone could be a witch. The power of suggestion, the influence of authority figures, and the rising tide of fear created a perfect storm. People who might never have thought of accusing their neighbors suddenly found themselves caught up in a tide that could not be stopped. But the most unsettling aspect of the Salem witch trials was how quickly the accusations spread. One by one, people were accused, and the town seemed to become possessed by an unseen force. The trials weren't limited to the women who were accused of witchcraft. They also ensnared men, children, and even respected members of the community. This was no simple case of a few hysterical people. It was a collective, widespread paranoia, a panic that swept through Salem like a plague. What was it about the town's collective psyche that made them so vulnerable to this feverish outbreak of suspicion? One of the most enduring mysteries surrounding the Salem witch trials is the strange phenomenon of spectral evidence. This was the idea that a person could be convicted of witchcraft not based on any physical evidence or confession, but by the testimony of someone claiming to see their specter, essentially their ghost, engaging in acts of witchcraft. In a time when belief in the supernatural was so deeply ingrained, this form of evidence was taken as legitimate. Spectral evidence seemed to offer a window into the spiritual world, and it led to the condemnation of many innocent people. But how could a community, so deeply entrenched in its beliefs, allow such flimsy, intangible evidence to serve as the foundation for life or death decisions? And why did the trials proceed with such deadly momentum, even when voices of reason began to question the methods and motivations behind the accusations? Though many historians point to the socio-political environment, religious fervor, and social instability as the causes of the trials, there are also those who look to less tangible explanations. Some have speculated that the trials were a result of mass poisoning, specifically from the consumption of ergot, a hallucinogenic fungus that grows on rye and can cause symptoms similar to those described by the afflicted girls. This theory suggests that the strange behaviors and visions that sparked the panic could have been caused by an involuntary poisoning, making the townspeople's experiences even more terrifying and inexplicable. The Salem witch trials remain one of the most perplexing and tragic episodes in American history. The brutality and speed with which people were accused, tried, and executed defy logical explanation. The lives that were lost during this time, people who were victims of suspicion, fear, and an unforgiving system of belief, serve as a stark reminder of the dangers of hysteria, of a society driven by unfounded fears and the misuse of power. As we reflect on the events of Salem, the question remains: what caused this eruption of fear and violence? Was it the inevitable result of a deeply religious society living in fear of the unknown? Or was there something else, something darker, that drove the people of Salem to embrace such extreme measures? With so many theories, each offering a piece of the puzzle, the true cause of the Salem witch trials remains an open question. And in the quiet of Salem today, amidst its historic streets and monuments, one can't help but wonder, are there still lessons to be learned from the dark echoes of this infamous chapter in American history? And if so, what secrets remain hidden in the shadows of Salem's past? Somewhere off the coast of Ireland, shrouded in mist and mystery, lies the legend of Hy-Brasil, a phantom island seen by many throughout history but never truly found. Its very name evokes a sense of otherworldliness, as if the island exists on the fringe of the known world, hovering between reality and myth. Descriptions of Hy-Brasil vary from one account to the next, yet a few key features remain consistent. It is said to be an island of breathtaking beauty, a place of riches, advanced knowledge, and sometimes even of supernatural wonder. But despite all these claims, no one has ever been able to locate it with certainty. Could it be that Hy-Brasil was not a mere fantasy, but a place that was once real, and perhaps still is? The earliest mention of Hy-Brasil dates back to the 14th century, but its origins are tangled in folklore, drifting between the realms of fact and myth. Ancient maps, including those from the 16th century, depict Hy-Brasil as a large island, always just off the coast of Ireland. Some even marked it as Brazil, a term that would later come to be associated with the South American continent, but which, at the time, carried connotations of faraway lands and exotic riches. In these early accounts, Hy-Brasil was said to appear once every 7 years, hidden in the fog and mist that commonly veiled the Atlantic coast. A glowing, radiant island, its shores dotted with lush green fields and towering mountains, often claimed to be home to a mysterious and advanced civilization. The island was not just a physical place, it was a symbol, representing the limits of the known world, and perhaps even something more. In some stories, Hy-Brasil was a place of learning and enlightenment, where knowledge was passed down from ancient beings to a select few. In others, it was a place of magic, full of strange creatures, otherworldly artifacts, and enigmatic powers. But how could an island so vividly described and seen by so many remain elusive to all attempts at discovery? Explorers from different parts of Europe ventured out to find Hy-Brasil, but none ever returned with proof. Some maps even show the island positioned off the west coast of Ireland, but when sailors set out to find it, they either returned empty-handed or claimed to have witnessed it only to see it vanish before their eyes. Was it a mirage? A figment of overactive imaginations? Or was it something more extraordinary? As we dig deeper into the mystery, the sightings of Hy-Brasil become more baffling. One of the most famous reports came from the 16th century explorer John Nisbet, who claimed to have spotted the island from his ship in 1674. According to Nisbet, the island was visible for hours, but when the ship attempted to sail closer, it mysteriously disappeared behind a thick fog. Was this simply an optical illusion? Or was there something unusual about the island's location, something that defied the normal laws of perception? Other accounts, such as those recorded by sailors and cartographers in the centuries that followed, provide tantalizing glimpses of Hy-Brasil, but none offer definitive proof. In fact, as time passed, the sightings grew more erratic. Some claim to have seen the island under strange weather conditions, when the skies were unusually clear or when fog had just begun to roll in. Others reported that the island appeared only in the evening or at night, glowing with an ethereal light, casting an unsettling, almost supernatural aura over the surrounding waters. But the story of Hy-Brasil doesn't end with the sightings of early explorers. The island's presence in mythology continued to captivate the imaginations of later generations. In the 19th century, the island was linked to various occult theories and was sometimes described as a center for ancient, arcane knowledge. The island was even tied to Arthurian legend, with some speculating that it was the resting place of the legendary King Arthur, a place where he and his knights would one day return. This connection to ancient kings and mystical powers only added to the allure of Hy-Brasil. Still, despite centuries of speculation, no one has ever definitively identified Hy-Brasil. Some historians and geographers have proposed that the island could be a mistaken interpretation of real places, such as the Isle of Man, or even parts of the Outer Hebrides? Could it have been that early mapmakers confused islands that existed with one that was entirely fictitious? Or could there be something about Hy-Brasil's location that makes it unusually difficult to locate, perhaps hidden by natural elements such as intense fog or unpredictable tides? A more speculative theory suggests that Hy-Brasil was not merely an island, but a gateway, perhaps to another dimension or time. Some have pointed to the island's eerie, glowing descriptions, and the reports of it appearing and disappearing as evidence of a place not governed by the same rules as the world around it. Was it a space where the physical and metaphysical coexisted? Could it be that the island is still out there, hidden in plain sight, and that only those who truly understand its mysteries can find it? In fact, some modern-day explorers and enthusiasts continue to search for Hy-Brasil, often fueled by theories of lost civilizations or uncharted territories. However, despite these efforts, no concrete evidence has emerged to prove the island's existence. Yet, the legend endures, suggesting that there is something about Hy-Brasil, something in the human psyche, that draws us to it. Could it be that the island represents our longing for discovery, the deep-seated human desire to unlock the unknown? Or perhaps it is the mystery itself that keeps us searching, offering an ever-elusive riddle that lures the curious and the brave into the wild, uncharted waters of the Atlantic. Even today, the question lingers. Is Hy-Brasil merely a figment of imagination, a relic of early folklore, or could it be something more? As the centuries pass and more attempts to locate the island are made, the mystery remains unresolved. The waters off the coast of Ireland still hide their secrets, and Hy-Brasil continues to live in the collective consciousness as a symbol of mystery and wonder. Perhaps Hy-Brasil is a riddle meant to remain unsolved, a reminder that the world is full of enigmas that, no matter how much we probe, may never reveal themselves fully. Or, just maybe, Hy-Brasil still waits, its shores hidden by fog, its secrets lost to time, ready to be uncovered when the world is ready for its revelation. Until then, we must ask ourselves, is Hy-Brasil out there, waiting to be found, or is it simply a shadow of the past, drifting between the lines of history and myth? Juan de Fuca, Expedition. Claims, a hidden chapter in the Wild West. Mysteries. The rugged coastline of the Pacific Northwest is a land of mist and mystery. Fog rolls off the ocean in thick layers, swallowing up the jagged cliffs and towering pines, leaving everything to appear both ancient and timeless. Along this secluded shore, where the ocean's rhythm is the only sound that breaks the silence, one might not expect to encounter stories that stretch back centuries, stories of explorers, lost maps, and a forgotten claim that has yet to fully reveal its secrets. In the early 16th century, long before the Wild West as we know it had fully taken shape, one man named Juan de Fuca sailed into these mists, setting into motion a mystery that would continue to baffle historians, archaeologists, and adventurers for generations. His tale is not just one of sea voyages and forgotten expeditions, but one that is deeply entwined with the vast, unexplored territories of the Pacific Northwest, a place where the lines between fact and legend blur. Juan de Fuca, a name that rings through the annals of history, though often with an uncertain echo, was a Greek mariner, or perhaps more accurately, a navigator of ambiguous origins, who, in 1592, claimed to have discovered a strait that separates what is now the United States and the land to the north. Known today as the Strait of Juan de Fuca, this body of water sits as a natural divide between the Olympic Peninsula in the state of Washington and Vancouver Island in Canada. But what if the story told of his discovery is only a fraction of the larger mystery that surrounds this man and his journey? The claim itself is relatively simple. According to de Fuca, he had sailed for Spain under the commission of the Spanish Empire to find a route through the Americas, a passage that could provide easier access to the riches of the Pacific and the East Indies. In his report, de Fuca described a wide, deep-water channel between the landmasses, one that would become vital to later explorers, but there was something odd about his account. Despite the detailed nature of his description, the strait he spoke of remained elusive for nearly 250 years. Historians and explorers alike have questioned the authenticity of Juan de Fuca's claims. Why was there no evidence of such a significant discovery? Why didn't any other explorers confirm what he had written? Some believed that de Fuca's story was simply a myth, a fanciful tale spun to enhance his reputation, or perhaps even as a deliberate hoax to deceive the Spanish Empire. Yet, despite these doubts, the strait he described does exist, as does his name on modern maps, forever immortalizing his expedition. However, there's an unsettling aspect to this discovery, a sense that something crucial has been left unsaid. Was Juan de Fuca truly the first to sail these waters, or was he simply the one who had the courage to report it? A closer look at historical records reveals strange inconsistencies. There are mentions of other expeditions from different nations, some centuries earlier, that tell of similar channels and waterways in the very area where de Fuca claimed his strait. Could it be that the story of Juan de Fuca has been, for centuries, tangled in layers of myth, obscured truths, and forgotten exploration? Some researchers have pointed out that de Fuca's account may not be entirely fictional. After all, navigational records from that time are notoriously sparse and often incomplete. And yet, the absence of solid proof raises another question. Was the strait known to other peoples long before European explorers arrived on the continent? Indigenous tribes of the Pacific Northwest, like the Coast Salish and Haida, had lived along these shores for millennia, and their oral histories speak of vast waterways and trading routes that mirror descriptions of the strait. Were these indigenous peoples the true discoverers of the channel, with their knowledge passed down through generations, hidden in plain sight beneath the veil of colonial narratives? As we delve deeper into the mystery, it becomes apparent that the puzzle is not merely one of exploration or geographical discovery. The very existence of Juan de Fuca's expedition has been called into question by some historians. A critical analysis of his reported voyage reveals odd gaps and discrepancies. Why was there no mention of his discovery for decades after he supposedly returned to Spain? How did his detailed maps and accounts seemingly disappear, leaving behind only a vague mention of his name and a contested story? Could the strait have been known to Spanish navigators long before de Fuca's supposed journey, only to be hidden for reasons lost to time? It's worth noting that the first confirmed European to officially navigate the waters of the Strait of Juan de Fuca was George Vancouver in 1792, almost 200 years after de Fuca's report. Vancouver, a British explorer, spent significant time mapping the coastline of the Pacific Northwest and further confirming the existence of the strait. He was meticulous, and his detailed maps and logs leave little room for doubt. Yet, despite Vancouver's thorough exploration, the mystery of de Fuca's claim persists, wrapped in a fog of uncertainty. Perhaps the most intriguing aspect of this tale lies in the legacy of the name itself, Juan de Fuca. Why, if his voyage was shrouded in such controversy, did the strait come to bear his name? Some suggest that this may be more than a simple naming convention. Could the Spanish Empire have intentionally immortalized a man whose journey may have been more symbolic than factual, a representation of their claims to distant lands? Or was de Fuca's story merely the spark that ignited further exploration in a land already teeming with its own mysteries and ancient knowledge? As with many stories from the Wild West, where historical facts intertwine with legend, the mystery of Juan de Fuca's expedition remains unresolved. Was he truly the first European to sail into these waters, Or is his story just one chapter in a larger, more complex narrative of forgotten explorers and uncharted territories? Could his report have been a deliberate exaggeration, a misrepresentation of a broader, less spectacular reality? Or is it possible that the very strait he described was known to ancient peoples long before European ships ever set sail across the Pacific? The answers, if they exist at all, may still lie hidden beneath the ocean's surface, lost in the fog that has long shrouded the coast of the Pacific Northwest. The mystery remains a tantalizing riddle, one that asks more questions than it answers. The only certainty is that Juan de Fuca's name is etched into history, his expedition cloaked in the same shadows that have long held sway over this forgotten corner of the Wild West. And so, we are left with the lingering question, what truly happened in those early days of exploration, and how many stories, like that of Juan de Fuca, remain to be uncovered, their mysteries still awaiting the light of discovery? In the end, the enigma of Juan de Fuca's voyage speaks to the broader themes of exploration itself, where myth and reality often blur, and where the pursuit of knowledge is as much about the stories we tell as it is about the facts we uncover. The Pacific Northwest, with its rugged coastline and vast, untamed waters, has always held a magnetic pull for adventurers and dreamers alike. Its history is a mosaic of cultural encounters, from indigenous peoples who have lived in the region for thousands of years to the intrepid explorers who came from across the globe. Juan de Fuca, whether a real figure or not, symbolizes the intersection of these worlds, where the spirit of discovery was as much about imagination as it was about navigation. As we continue to probe the mysteries of history, we are reminded that every exploration is colored by the perspectives and assumptions of those who undertake it. What we know or think we know about the past is often shaped by the stories passed down through time, stories that may have been altered, distorted, or even invented along the way. Perhaps Juan de Fuca's tale is one such story, amplified by the passage of time and the need to fill in the gaps of a world still largely unknown. But regardless of the veracity of his journey, his name endures, a testament to the enduring allure of the unknown and the human desire to chart the uncharted. In the future, as new discoveries are made and forgotten histories come to light, we may find that Juan de Fuca's legacy is not simply a question of who sailed where and when, but of what stories we choose to remember and why. The mystery of his voyage may never be fully unraveled, but perhaps that is fitting. After all, the greatest adventures often leave us with more questions than answers, questions that continue to spark curiosity, fuel imagination, and inspire the explorers of tomorrow. The fog of uncertainty that surrounds Juan de Fuca's name is, in its own way, a reminder that the true spirit of discovery lies not in the answers we find, but in the journey itself. As the winds sweep across the barren landscapes of the American West, whispering secrets of a forgotten past, there lies a mystery entwined with one of the most peculiar and fascinating relics of the frontier, a book of divine significance, wrought from silver, its pages as enigmatic as the land itself. This book, known as the Silver Bible, is not merely an artifact. It is an object of reverence, curiosity, and deep mystery. What makes this Bible truly unique is not only its extravagant construction, silver embossed covers and delicate engravings, but its content, or more precisely, the lack of it. The story begins in the late 1800s, in the rugged desert of Utah, where the Mormon settlers had begun to carve out a life from the unforgiving land. In the mid-19th century, the Silver Bible came into the possession of a man named John H. Stenhouse, a Mormon elder, who was said to have discovered the Bible in a forgotten cave while on an expedition. The Bible, or what was believed to be the Bible, was unlike any other. Crafted from silver and adorned with intricate carvings, its design was unlike anything produced by human hands up to that point. It shimmered in the desert sun like a sacred artifact, and soon it would become a symbol of something greater than itself, a connection to the mysterious past. But it was not just the Bible's design that caught the attention of those who encountered it. It was the missing pages, the pages that were said to have been removed, lost to time, or perhaps intentionally hidden from view. What was contained on those pages, and why, after centuries of existence, had they vanished? When John Stenhouse brought the Bible back to Salt Lake City, its arrival stirred both awe and suspicion. Some saw it as a divine artifact, proof that the true history of the early settlers of the Americas was yet to be uncovered. Others, however, believed it to be a hoax, a product of an imagination run wild or a clever fabrication. But there were those who believed that the Silver Bible held more than just a religious message. They speculated that it contained ancient knowledge, perhaps a lost gospel, or even a forgotten piece of history, one that could rewrite what we know about early human civilization in the Americas. What made the Bible's pages so tantalizing were the rumors that surrounded them. It was said that the missing pages had contained a hidden history of the early world, one that linked the indigenous peoples of the Americas to the ancient civilizations of the Old World, Egypt, Palestine, and even beyond. This idea raised a number of questions that have lingered in the minds of historians, archaeologists, and religious scholars alike. Could there have been a connection between the ancient peoples of Palestine and the indigenous tribes of the Americas? Was the Bible a relic of a lost civilization that had sailed across the seas long before Columbus? Or was it merely a product of folklore and legend, a reflection of the growing mysticism that defined the American West during the 19th century? The more one examines the Bible and its story, the more one finds contradictions and gaps. Many of those who studied the Silver Bible found no concrete evidence that the Bible ever existed in its original form. Some historians argue that the entire tale of the Silver Bible was fabricated, perhaps to fuel the religious fervor and excitement of the time. Others claim that there are indeed records of the Bible's existence, but they are sketchy and fragmentary at best. No known photographs of the Silver Bible survive, and no verified records of its physical location have been found. Even more perplexing are the stories of those who encountered the Bible firsthand. There are several conflicting accounts about the Bible's condition, the number of missing pages, and the precise nature of the writings that were said to have once adorned them. Some reports suggest that the pages contained writings in languages that could not be identified, while others describe elaborate symbols and images that seem to have no logical explanation. Was this a deliberate attempt to obscure the truth, or was it the result of time's slow erosion of a precious and irreplaceable artifact? The most fascinating part of the Silver Bible's tale is the speculation about what might have been written on those missing pages. For those who believe that the Bible contains ancient knowledge, the missing pages become a source of endless intrigue. Some have suggested that these pages contained lost scriptures, perhaps predating even the most well-known biblical texts. Others argue that the Bible could be a cryptic chronicle of an ancient civilization, a civilization whose story was erased from history. Was the Silver Bible part of a wider cultural movement, a symbolic gesture meant to unite disparate groups of peoples? Or perhaps it was a message, a forgotten history from a time long before the world knew the names of Columbus or even the ancient Greeks. Over the years, the mystery of the Silver Bible has only deepened. Some theories point to the idea that the Bible could have been linked to the migration of ancient peoples across the globe. The idea of pre-Columbian transoceanic contact, suggesting that ancient civilizations such as those in Palestine or Egypt may have sailed across the seas to the Americas, has long been a subject of interest among fringe theorists. Could the Silver Bible have been a product of such a migration, a record of that lost history? Was it a testament to a long-lost connection between the peoples of the Old World and the New? There is another theory that persists in the folklore surrounding the Bible. Some believe that the missing pages were removed for a more sinister reason, perhaps by those who wished to suppress the knowledge contained within them. In a time when control of information was paramount, could the removal of these pages have been an act of deliberate censorship? Were the contents of the Bible's missing pages so powerful, so controversial, that they were hidden to prevent the world from learning the truth? Despite the many theories and the fervent speculation, no one has been able to definitively answer what happened to the missing pages of the Silver Bible. Various searches have been conducted over the years to uncover the Bible's whereabouts, but none have succeeded in finding the Bible or any trace of its pages. The Bible itself has vanished into the annals of history, leaving behind only its legacy of speculation and wonder. The most compelling mystery surrounding the Silver Bible is not necessarily the question of where it went or who possessed it, but rather the questions it raises about the nature of history itself. What if the pages contained knowledge that could change our understanding of the past? What if, in these lost pages, there was evidence that could reveal an entirely new chapter of human history? Could it be that the answers to questions about human migration, ancient civilizations, and the origins of the Americas have always been just out of reach? What we know for certain is that the Silver Bible remains an enduring symbol of the unknown. Its story is one of speculation, mystery, and the tantalizing possibility that some truths are simply meant to remain hidden. The missing pages, whatever they may have contained, continue to haunt the pages of history, reminding us that there are still untold stories buried beneath the surface of time. So, as we ponder the enigma of the Silver Bible and its missing pages, one cannot help but wonder, what truths remain obscured in the annals of history, waiting to be uncovered? And what other mysteries, like this one, have yet to reveal themselves to the curious and the daring in the shadow of the Wild West's most terrifying enigmas? As we continue to search for answers to the questions surrounding the Silver Bible, it becomes evident that the story may not be about the Bible itself, but about the desire for knowledge that transcends time and place. Throughout history, humankind has been driven by a need to understand its origins, its purpose, and its connection to the wider world. The Silver Bible, whether real or myth, speaks to this universal curiosity. It represents not only the allure of lost knowledge, but also the fear of what such knowledge might reveal, an uncomfortable truth that could shake the very foundations of history as we know it. The idea that something could be hidden from us, deliberately erased or concealed, taps into our deepest fears and desires. The fact that the Silver Bible has vanished, leaving behind only traces of its once mighty presence, speaks to the fragility of history itself. What we hold dear today, our documents, our artifacts, our stories, are all susceptible to the ravages of time, neglect, or intention. We may never know what secrets the Bible's missing pages held, but their absence only amplifies the mysteries of our collective past. Perhaps the true power of the Silver Bible lies not in the content it may have once carried, but in the questions it continues to raise and the inspiration it sparks for those seeking to uncover the lost chapters of human history. In the grand scope of time, the Silver Bible may remain an enigma, forever a part of the Wild West's untold mysteries. But in that very ambiguity, it serves a larger purpose, to remind us that history is a living, breathing entity, one that is often incomplete, fragmented, and open to interpretation. The search for the Silver Bible and its missing pages may not just be about finding an ancient artifact. It may be a quest to understand the very nature of truth itself. And perhaps, in the end, the Bible's story will be one that continues to unfold, layer by layer, revealing new insights, even as it remains just out of reach. The year was 1718, and the distant echoes of battle had long since faded across the barren landscape of Sweden. The roar of cannons, the clash of swords, and the cries of soldiers were now silent. In the heart of this quiet aftermath, far from the clamorous front lines, a peculiar death unfolded, one that would cast an eerie shadow over the final chapter of a king's life. Charles XII of Sweden, a monarch who had earned both admiration and fear across Europe, was dead. But it was not the manner of his death that has intrigued historians, nor the circumstances surrounding his passing. It is the question of how he died, and why his death has remained shrouded in mystery for centuries, that has kept scholars, theorists, and curious minds captivated. To understand the intrigue that surrounds Charles XII's death, we must first step back and consider the man himself. Charles, often called the last of the great conquerors, was only 36 years old when he died. Yet, in his short life, he had accomplished much. Rising to the throne at the tender age of 15, he led his country through years of war and conquest, most famously during the Great Northern War, where Sweden battled a coalition of Russia, Denmark, Norway, and Poland. His military campaigns earned him the admiration of many, and his resolve on the battlefield was unparalleled. But as the tide of war eventually turned against Sweden, Charles retreated to the Ottoman Empire, and it was there, in 1718, that his life came to a sudden and mysterious end. Charles XII had been in the midst of a siege at the Norwegian fortress of Fredrikstad when he was struck by a bullet. It was on November 30th, 1718, during a cold and bleak winter evening, that the king was shot in the head while observing the battle from behind the walls of his camp. He collapsed instantly. His death was announced quickly, and the cause appeared straightforward. A sniper's bullet had found its mark, ending the life of one of Europe's most renowned military figures. But the truth of Charles XII's death, as simple as it may first appear, is far from clear. Was it truly an enemy sniper's shot that killed him? Or, as some historians have suggested, was it something much more sinister? Was Charles XII's death the result of a carefully executed assassination, orchestrated by those who had grown weary of his military zeal and unyielding ambition? Or could the king's own soldiers have been involved in the tragic event? The official account of his death, as dictated by the Swedish court, suggests that a bullet, fired from a distance, struck Charles in the head as he observed the siege from a small loophole in the fortress. His body was quickly retrieved, and it was reported that the wound appeared to have come from a high-velocity shot, possibly from a rifle. Theories surrounding the sniper's identity range from Russian soldiers to Norwegian marksmen, but there was one glaring problem. No one ever found the source of the shot. At first, the details seem straightforward, yet the absence of a direct witness and the lack of tangible evidence surrounding the bullet's origin raise questions. How could a sniper's shot be so perfectly timed and so precise without leaving any trace? Why were there no obvious signs of struggle or an assassin's rifle found in the vicinity? Was it possible that the shot had not come from an external enemy at all, but from within the king's own ranks? Several contemporary reports from those who were with Charles at the time of his death suggest that something more mysterious may have occurred. Some said that the bullet that struck Charles was of unusual caliber, a caliber that did not match any of the guns typically used by the enemy forces. This has led some historians to speculate that the bullet might not have been fired from outside the camp, but rather from within, a possibility that raises the chilling notion of a betrayal. In addition to these suspicions, there were reports from those close to Charles suggesting that the king had been acting erratically in the days leading up to his death. He was known for his unshakable resolve, his tenacity, and his refusal to abandon his military goals, even when his forces were exhausted and his kingdom crumbled. Was it possible that his unwavering drive had led him into the realm of paranoia and distrust? Could he have been so obsessed with securing a victory that he saw treachery where there was none? Then there is the theory that Charles XII might have taken his own life. Given the way he lived, dedicated entirely to the cause of war and conquest. Was it possible that Charles, facing the inevitable collapse of his dreams, chose to end his own life rather than suffer the disgrace of defeat? Some of his inner circle reportedly claimed that the king was emotionally burdened by the loss of his army and the mounting pressure of his failing campaigns. Did the king, in his final moments, take a dark and dramatic step to control his own fate? The notion of suicide has never been fully embraced by historians, but there are those who argue that the complexity of Charles's character may have led him down such a path. In his last days, many reported that Charles was increasingly distant, introspective, and even melancholic, a stark contrast to the bold and fearless leader who had once led his troops to victory. Could this shift in behavior have been a precursor to his tragic end? While there is no definitive evidence to support this theory, it remains one of the most haunting possibilities. Then, there are the more fringe theories, which speculate that Charles XII's death was not merely the result of a bullet, but the result of an elaborate plot, a conspiracy of the highest order. Some claim that political rivals within Sweden, aware that Charles's obsessive pursuit of military glory was draining the resources of his nation, may have orchestrated a coup within his own camp. His death could have been engineered not by foreign enemies, but by those within his court who had grown disillusioned with his leadership. Was the king's death a well-executed political maneuver by those who believed his reign was doomed? Despite the various theories and the tantalizing clues that suggest multiple possibilities, no definitive answer has ever emerged. What remains undeniable is that Charles XII's death, just like his life, remains an enigma. It was a death that seemed to defy reason, a death that left unanswered questions about the nature of power, ambition, and the price of glory. The questions surrounding Charles XII's passing are not just about how he died, but about the larger implications of his life, a life marked by triumphs and failures, driven by a singular vision that may have led him to his own demise. Even today, over 300 years after his death, the mystery of Charles XII continues to fascinate and perplex. Historians, archaeologists, and enthusiasts of military history have combed through the available records, searching for a clue, a missing piece that might finally solve the riddle. Yet, for all their efforts, the death of the king remains one of the most haunting and unresolved mysteries of early modern history. So, as we contemplate the final moments of Charles XII, we are left to wonder, did he truly fall victim to a sniper's bullet? Or was there more at play? An act of betrayal, a political conspiracy, or even the king's own hand that sealed his fate? Could the answers lie hidden in a long-forgotten letter, an undiscovered diary, or a buried piece of evidence that has yet to surface? The answers, it seems, may never be fully known. But the questions linger, as they have for centuries, prompting us to continue searching for the truth behind one of the most mysterious deaths in history. And perhaps, the greatest mystery of all is not the question of how Charles XII died, but what might still be hidden in the pages of history, waiting to be uncovered. As time passes, the mystery surrounding Charles XII's death becomes not just a curiosity of history, but a reflection of the complexities of power and human nature itself. The king's life, marked by unyielding ambition and a refusal to surrender to the whims of fate, was a testament to the dangers of single-minded resolve. His death, however, reveals the tragic consequences of that same rigidity. The possibility that his obsession with military conquest blinded him to the fragility of his own position, both on the battlefield and within his inner circle. Perhaps his death was not just a result of an assassin's bullet or a political maneuver, but the inevitable outcome of a ruler who had pushed both his kingdom and himself to the brink. In the summer of 1518, the streets of Strasbourg, then part of the Holy Roman Empire, were alive with an inexplicable and terrifying phenomenon. A group of men and women, stricken by a mysterious compulsion, began to dance. But it was no joyful celebration or spontaneous outburst of festivity. It was as though they were consumed by an invisible force, compelled to move to an unheard rhythm, with no control over their own bodies. The epidemic would grow to involve dozens, some say even hundreds, of dancers who could not stop, not even as they collapsed from exhaustion and eventually death. This phenomenon, known as the Dancing Plague of 1518, has become one of the most chilling and perplexing events in medical history. The historical record paints a vivid, disturbing picture. People danced uncontrollably for days, and many died from exhaustion, strokes, or heart failure. Some accounts say the victims were not only uncontrollable in their movements, but were also unable to articulate why they were compelled to do so. They danced as if caught in a trance, with no explanation, no relief. The bizarre outbreak of this dancing mania was eventually attributed to various causes, from ergot poisoning, a hallucinogenic fungus that grows on rye, to mass hysteria. But the questions surrounding the dancing plague did not fade with the passage of time. In fact, for centuries, the phenomenon was considered an isolated and unique incident, until, much later, something even more unsettling was uncovered. What historians have since uncovered points to a deeply unsettling mystery that may have been overlooked in the wake of this unprecedented event. What if the dancing plague was not confined to 1518 alone? What if the cases did not stop in Strasbourg? And what if this strange compulsion to dance, an uncontrollable, all-consuming urge, was merely the beginning of a wider, more persistent phenomenon? The first post-dancing plague case that truly caught the attention of researchers came in the 17th century. In 1630, reports emerged from another corner of Europe. A similar outbreak occurred in the town of Aachen, located in what is now Western Germany. This time, it wasn't hundreds of people, but a smaller group, around 15 individuals, who succumbed to the same strange compulsion. They began to dance in public, thrashing their bodies uncontrollably. Once again, the cause was unclear. Some theorists pointed to the reemergence of ergot, or to an even more bizarre theory, that the initial outbreak had been a symptom of something larger, something that could manifest itself again under certain social and psychological conditions. Though less widespread, the eerily similar nature of this second outbreak raised unsettling questions. Could these cases be the remnants of a larger phenomenon, one that had somehow lingered, even after the initial plague had ended? Could the contagion of the mind, this overwhelming force that seemed to compel human bodies to dance uncontrollably, be more than a momentary madness? Could it have been a psychological condition that left scars on society, resurfacing long after the first epidemic? There are cases in the years that followed, scattered across Europe like distant echoes, where small groups of people were reported to have suffered from the same inexplicable urge. In the early 18th century, another outbreak was documented in the Netherlands. In this case, the victims were not confined to a single town, but rather stretched across multiple cities. These smaller outbreaks seemed less publicized, perhaps because they were confined to a handful of witnesses, but the parallels were unmistakable. Similar to the 1518 outbreak, some victims danced for hours, others for days, until they collapsed from exhaustion. But what could possibly link these events together across centuries, through different regions, and with no apparent cause? The question gnaws at the edge of the historical record. Some researchers suggest that the dancing plague was not a biological contagion, but a form of collective behavior. Could it have been a reaction to the stresses and hardships of the times? After all, the 16th and 17th centuries were tumultuous. Wars, plagues, and famines ravaged much of Europe. The psychological toll on the people must have been immense. Could the dance be a form of mass hysteria, triggered by the collective stress of a society on the brink? Others have suggested that these outbreaks could be seen as the remnants of a much deeper and more disturbing phenomenon, a spiritual or ritualistic impulse that had taken on a life of its own. The idea of possession or trance-like states was widespread during this period, and some have theorized that these dancing episodes could have been expressions of hidden societal pressures or even a form of spiritual possession. The lines between mass hysteria, religious ecstasy, and mental illness were often blurred in these eras, and the phenomenon could have been seen by some as a divine visitation or an omen. Still, the persistent nature of these cases raises even deeper questions. Could the dancing plague not have been entirely biological or psychological? Could it have been something else entirely, an ancient ailment or influence that continues to linger in forgotten corners of history? The theory of ergot poisoning, for example, still raises doubts among some researchers, even though the fungus causes hallucinations and spasms. Could there have been a more persistent environmental factor, a contagion that continues to evolve in ways we cannot yet comprehend? The most unsettling thought is this: what if the phenomenon of mass dancing was not something that belonged to the past at all? Could the dance still be happening today, in some form, in some obscure corner of the world? In fact, there are modern instances, rare but not impossible, where people have reported experiencing similar uncontrollable movements, sometimes in crowds, sometimes alone. Could the ancient and modern cases be linked by a thread that has never been fully explored? Even more perplexing is the question of the long-term effects of these post-plague cases. Some reports from the 17th and 18th centuries describe individuals who, after the episode, experienced lasting psychological scars. These survivors seem to be left with a deep sense of trauma, sometimes losing the ability to speak, to move normally, or even to regain a sense of control over their bodies. Were these later cases manifestations of a deeper psychological condition, the lingering echoes of something far more traumatic than anyone realized? In the annals of history, there are whispers that suggest that some may still be possessed by the dancing plague, though no one would dare to admit it openly. Some modern-day sufferers of unexplained conditions, whether physical or mental, may find themselves drawn to historical accounts of the dancing plague in a way that seems too uncanny to dismiss. Could it be possible that this strange contagion, whether psychological, spiritual, or biological, has not yet fully let go of us? As the centuries pass, the post-dancing plague cases remain a tantalizing riddle, elusive and resistant to easy explanations. We are left with a fragmented historical record and a series of questions that seem to defy resolution. Was the dancing plague of 1518 simply an isolated moment in history, or was it the beginning of something more profound and far-reaching? Could the echoes of that ancient madness still reverberate through the centuries, waiting for the right conditions to trigger another outbreak? The answers may be buried deep in the archives of history, in forgotten corners of the world, or perhaps hidden within the dark recesses of the human mind. Until then, the mystery of the post-dancing plague cases remains one of the most disturbing and unresolved chapters of our collective past, an enigma that continues to beckon us to explore the limits of human behavior, the fragility of the mind, and the strange forces that still influence us from beyond the veil of time. As we continue to peer into the shadowy depths of history, it becomes apparent that the true nature of the dancing plague is elusive, defying easy categorization. Was it a viral contagion, a deep psychological phenomenon, or perhaps something more mysterious, rooted in the collective psyche of a traumatized Europe? What seems clear is that the phenomenon was not merely a fleeting episode, but a reflection of deeper societal fractures, an expression of human vulnerability in times of extreme stress. Whether it was caused by ergot, mass hysteria, or spiritual forces, the plague continues to challenge our understanding of human behavior and the intricate connections between the body, mind, and society. Beneath the restless waves of the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of the Caribbean and along the rugged shores of the American colonies, there lies a tale that has captivated adventurers, historians, and treasure hunters for centuries. It is a story of fortune, betrayal, and a vanished treasure that has never been recovered. A mystery that haunts the annals of pirate lore and continues to spark imaginations to this day. This is the story of Captain William Kidd, a pirate whose name became synonymous with the golden age of piracy and the elusive treasure that he hid, only to have it disappear into the depths of history. Captain Kidd was, in his time, a man of great contradiction. Born in Scotland in 1645, he sailed for both the British Navy and the pirate ships of the Caribbean, straddling the line between privateer and outlaw. His most infamous deed was the capture of the Quedagh Merchant, a ship sailing under the East India Company's flag. The capture of this vessel, while considered a legal act of piracy by many of his peers, would ultimately lead to his downfall. Kidd's subsequent trial for piracy and murder in 1701 sent shockwaves throughout Europe, marking him as one of the most infamous pirates of his time. Yet, for all his notoriety, it is the treasure that Kidd supposedly buried, his ill-gotten gains, that continues to mystify. The treasure is said to have been hidden on an island, somewhere between the Caribbean and the American coastline, in a spot so secretive that it has defied discovery for over 300 years. The legend of Captain Kidd's buried treasure began to take hold during the last years of his life. After Kidd was arrested and tried for his crimes, he was eventually sentenced to death, though he was granted a reprieve long enough to confess to the location of his treasure. According to various accounts, Kidd revealed that he had hidden his loot on an island off the coast of the American colonies, where it remained untouched, waiting for someone bold enough to retrieve it. The accounts vary on the specifics. Some say he hid the treasure on a small, uncharted island somewhere in the Caribbean. Others claim it was buried along the shores of the North American colonies, hidden somewhere in the wilds of Long Island or the waters off New England. In any case, it was said to be a vast fortune, a wealth accumulated from plundered ships and treasure chests, waiting for a worthy adventurer to claim it. But for all the stories and all the tantalizing clues, the treasure has never been found. Over the years, countless treasure hunters have set out in search of Kidd's hidden fortune, combing through maps, old journals, and obscure legends in the hopes of finding the fabled hoard. Yet, despite their best efforts, the treasure remains elusive, perhaps buried too well, or perhaps lost forever to the shifting sands of time. So, what happened to Captain Kidd's treasure? Where did it go, and why has it never been found? One of the most enduring mysteries of Kidd's treasure is the nature of the treasure itself. Most accounts describe it as an enormous fortune, worth hundreds of thousands of pounds in the 17th century, an unimaginable sum. Some reports describe chests of gold, silver, jewels, and other treasures, all buried on a remote island, waiting for a fortune hunter to find it. But other accounts raise the possibility that the treasure was never hidden in the first place. Could it be that Kidd, a man who had already been betrayed by his crew and the British authorities, simply never buried the treasure at all? Perhaps it was a ruse, an elaborate fiction crafted by Kidd as a way of securing a final measure of hope before his trial. Could he have hidden his fortune elsewhere, beyond the reach of his captors, perhaps within a faraway bank or secreted away in a safe house on the mainland? Despite these speculations, many still believe that Kidd did indeed bury his treasure on one of the islands in the Caribbean or along the eastern seaboard of America. Over the years, there have been numerous reports of treasure hunters who claim to have found something, a piece of a chest, a gold coin, or a piece of jewelry, but nothing has ever been verified, and no substantial portion of Kidd's supposed wealth has ever been recovered. One of the most intriguing sites tied to the legend of Kidd's treasure is Gardiner's Island, located just off the coast of Long Island, New York. The island, once owned by the Gardner family, has long been associated with Kidd. Historical records indicate that Kidd visited the island during his voyages and may have had connections to the island's landowners. Could this have been where he buried his treasure? Many treasure hunters have ventured to Gardner's Island over the years, and some even claim to have found clues suggesting that Kidd's fortune lies beneath the earth or in the surrounding waters. Yet despite these tantalizing claims, no one has ever uncovered the full extent of the treasure, leaving its true location an enduring enigma. In addition to Gardner's Island, other locations have been suggested over the years, including the islands of the Caribbean, such as the Bahamas, or along the coast of Maine, where some believe Kidd may have buried his treasure to avoid detection by the British Navy. These theories are further complicated by the fact that, after Kidd's arrest, his crew, who would have been privy to the treasure's location, were either executed or scattered to the winds. Could someone have taken the secret of the treasure's location to their grave? Or was the treasure itself simply too well hidden, perhaps protected by a series of traps or natural obstacles, making it nearly impossible to recover? While many treasure hunters have ventured to these locations over the centuries, the story of Kidd's treasure has remained tantalizingly out of reach. Some experts suggest that the search for Kidd's treasure may be inherently flawed. Perhaps the treasure is not located where history and legend have suggested, but in a place yet to be discovered. After all, Kidd was an astute and shrewd man, one who would likely have gone to great lengths to obscure the location of his fortune. He knew that, if he was caught, his treasure would be the key to his survival or escape, and he would have hidden it in a way that ensured it would remain untouched. There are even those who suggest that Kidd's treasure may have been lost to history in another way, that it was never intended to be found. Did Kidd, in his final days, choose to abandon his treasure to the elements or the sea, perhaps to keep it out of the hands of his enemies? Could the treasure have been lost in a storm, or perhaps sunk beneath the waves in a shipwreck that occurred after Kidd's trial? The disappearance of Captain Kidd's treasure is more than just a historical mystery. It is a symbol of the elusiveness of wealth and the fleeting nature of pirate fortune. For centuries, it has captured the imagination of those who dream of hidden riches, and yet it remains a tantalizing riddle, a puzzle that defies resolution. Why has the treasure never been found? Is it because it is too well hidden, or is it that the key to unlocking its location remains lost to time? As we continue to search for the truth behind Kidd's treasure, we are left with more questions than answers. Could the treasure still be out there, waiting for the right person to find it? Or has the legend of Captain Kidd's fortune become a myth that will never be solved? Whatever the answer, the mystery of Captain Kidd's treasure persists, a story that endures through the centuries, as elusive and captivating as the man himself. And as long as the mystery remains, the legend of Captain Kidd will continue to inspire those who dare to dream of hidden riches and the thrill of discovery, perhaps even as it lurks just beyond reach in the shifting sands of history. The mystery surrounding Captain Kidd's treasure continues to linger as one of the most enduring and tantalizing legends of the pirate era. It represents not just the allure of untold riches, but also the notion that some secrets are meant to remain hidden, locked away by time and the choices of those who came before us. Whether it is buried deep beneath the earth, lost in the shifting sands of history, or forever lost beneath the waves, the treasure has become a symbol of the quest for fortune and the ultimate futility of greed. After all, no treasure hunt is ever as simple as it seems. Sometimes, the real prize is the journey itself, the search, the adventure, and the mystery that keeps us coming back for more. At the edges of modern history lies a vast and mysterious realm, one that for centuries was said to stretch across the expanse of Asia, from the steppes of Mongolia to the shores of Eastern Europe. This was the world of Great Tartary, a name that evokes a shadowy and somewhat mythical empire, vast in both size and influence, but largely forgotten in the contemporary historical narrative. Once a region known for its powerful rulers, impressive cultures, and grand cities, Great Tartary has now become a name whispered in the forgotten corners of history, obscured by the relentless march of time and perhaps the deliberate efforts of those who sought to erase it from memory. But what happened to the records of this once great empire? Why do historical documents from the era seem to have vanished, leaving us with only fragments of the grand narrative of a civilization that may have spanned continents? The question of why Great Tartary's history remains so elusive is one of the most perplexing mysteries of the past, one that continues to fuel speculation and intrigue among historians and enthusiasts alike. The origins of Great Tartary, or Tartaria as it was sometimes known, are themselves shrouded in mystery. The name Tartary was first used by Europeans in the 13th century, when Marco Polo's accounts of his travels to Asia helped bring the existence of the Mongol Empire to the attention of the West. But the term did not describe a single nation or empire. It referred to a sprawling region, home to a number of diverse tribes, cultures, and kingdoms. The Mongol Empire, which dominated much of Tartary at its height under Genghis Khan, is the most well-known political entity associated with the name, but it was far from the only one. Stretching from what is today's Russia and Siberia to parts of China, the Great Tartary was a land of extremes, endless steppes, towering mountain ranges, and vast, uncharted territories. Its people, ranging from the Mongols and Turks to Slavs and various other ethnic groups, were bound by the expansive nature of their land and by a shared history of conflict, conquest, and trade. The empire flourished for centuries, and its legacy can still be felt in the cultural influences of the region today. But, somewhere along the way, the records of this vast civilization began to disappear. One of the most intriguing aspects of this vanishing history is the mysterious absence of detailed historical records. For a land so wide and with such significant influence, one would expect a wealth of documentation, royal decrees, city records, maps, and chronicles of battles, leaders, and cultural achievements. Yet, when we turn to the historical archives of Europe and Asia, the tangible evidence of Great Tartary's past is shockingly sparse. What few surviving records exist are often vague, contradictory, or cryptic. One explanation that has been put forward is that much of the historical record of Great Tartary was destroyed during the fall of the Mongol Empire. After the empire's disintegration in the 14th and 15th centuries, much of the region fell into chaos, and the once grand cities were sacked, their libraries burned, and their archives looted. The Mongols, once feared for their military prowess, were now in retreat. As the Russians, Chinese, and other powers expanded into the territories once controlled by the Mongols, the remnants of the Tartarian civilization were absorbed, altered, and often obliterated from history. However, this theory fails to explain the nearly complete disappearance of records from other parts of the empire that were not directly impacted by military conquest. Areas far from the Mongol heartland, such as Siberia or the Central Asian steppes, seem to have experienced no such devastation. Yet, even in these regions, any detailed documentation of their past, especially regarding their role in the greater Tartarian Empire, is almost non-existent. Some historians point to the possibility that much of the Tartarian history was simply oral, passed down through generations rather than being written down in formal texts. However, the lack of any surviving oral traditions or folkloric records, especially in a region where oral storytelling has traditionally been such an important part of cultural preservation, raises more questions than answers. Could there have been a deliberate effort to erase the records of Great Tartary? In the 18th and 19th centuries, as European powers began to assert greater control over large parts of Asia, the story of Tartary was seemingly swept aside. Western maps from the era show a strange, almost eerie blankness where Tartary once stood. This was not just a geographical absence. It was as though the very history of the place was being expunged, scrubbed from the pages of history. However, this theory fails to explain the nearly complete disappearance of records from other parts of the empire that were not directly impacted by military conquest. Areas far from the Mongol heartland, such as Siberia or the Central Asian steppes, seem to have experienced no such devastation. Yet, even in these regions, any detailed documentation of their past, especially regarding their role in the greater Tartarian Empire, is almost non-existent. Some historians point to the possibility that much of the Tartarian history was simply oral, passed down through generations rather than being written down in formal texts. However, the lack of any surviving oral traditions or folkloric records, especially in a region where oral storytelling has traditionally been such an important part of cultural preservation, raises more questions than answers. Could there have been a deliberate effort to erase the records of Great Tartary? In the 18th and 19th centuries, as European powers began to assert greater control over large parts of Asia, the story of Tartary was seemingly swept aside. Western maps from the era show a strange, almost eerie blankness where Tartary once stood. This was not just a geographical absence. It was as though the very history of the place was being expunged, scrubbed from the pages of history. This concept of deliberate erasure has led some to speculate that Great Tartary's records may have been systematically destroyed, either by rival empires or by those seeking to suppress the memory of a past that might have rivaled or overshadowed their own. There are even theories suggesting that the historical erasure may have been more than just political. There are those who suggest that an advanced civilization, perhaps with knowledge and technology far beyond what we understand today, existed in Great Tartary. If this is true, then what purpose did the destruction of its records serve? Were these ancient secrets hidden away, kept from the eyes of the modern world for reasons unknown? Others suggest that Great Tartary's records were hidden away intentionally by those who saw the empire's influence as a threat. Perhaps, they argue, there were powerful forces that sought to undermine the Tartarian identity, viewing its vastness and potential as a danger to their own geopolitical ambitions. The idea of a forgotten, powerful empire, one whose very existence might challenge our understanding of history, has sparked interest in alternative theories about the lost records of Tartary. Another curious aspect of this mystery involves the ancient maps that depict Great Tartary in a way that is starkly different from how we understand the world today. Some of these maps, dating back to the 16th and 17th centuries, show a vast expanse of land, extending far beyond what is considered modern-day Russia or Mongolia. In these maps, Tartary is often portrayed as a highly sophisticated and well-established empire, complete with major cities, trade routes, and advanced infrastructure. Yet, in modern times, much of this land has been redefined, with little to suggest that a thriving civilization once existed there. These strange maps have led some to propose that the true extent of the Tartarian Empire was far greater than previously thought. Could it be that the empire's legacy was systematically minimized by historians and cartographers, perhaps to fit a narrative that favored the rise of modern European powers? Perhaps the most unsettling question surrounding the disappearance of Great Tartary's records is this: was it erased deliberately to obscure a truth that has yet to be uncovered? Was this empire far more advanced, far more powerful, and far more influential than we are willing to acknowledge? Some theories propose that Tartary was not merely an empire, but a thriving civilization with advanced technologies and cultural achievements that were lost to history. Could it be that the disappearance of its records was part of an ongoing effort to conceal its true nature from the world?